The water came up out of the ground at Duncairn every morning that summer, and it kept coming, and after a while I stopped going out to watch it. That is the part nobody warns you about. You spend 14 months digging 6 miles of tunnel through frozen ground with 1,000 people and 300 shafts, and you tell yourself that when the water comes you will feel something. Then the water comes, and for about 9 days you do feel it, and then it is simply the water. It arrives whether you are awake or not, and one morning you find yourself standing in your own workroom at dawn with nothing at all in your hands. What follows took 4 months. From the barley harvest to the dark of the year, and not a day longer, and I want that on the record at the front because when I tell it afterwards, it sounds like the work of a decade, and it was one autumn. I had 1,911 people. I had grain to the spring and past it. I had 240 men under arms, a market with honest weights, and a court that sat on the same day every week whether I was in the town or not. I was bored, and being bored frightened me more than the reavers had 3 years ago on my first night out here, because I know exactly what I am. I am not a brave man, and I am not a strong one. What I am is a man who can look at a piece of ground and see the water in it, and I had spent every month since I came here pointing that at problems that were screaming at me. Now nothing was screaming. And a man who only works when he is being screamed at is a man who will be standing precisely where he is when the next thing arrives. So let me put down what that summer actually looked like, because a man complaining about peace is insufferable unless you can see the peace. The tunnel runs 6 miles from the high ground at Cold fell down to the town, underground the whole way, at a fall of about 1 in 1,100. There are 304 shafts along it, sunk every 30 yards or so, and every one of them has a stone collar and a numbered cap, and 11 of them have villages growing round them now. That is the thing I did not predict and should have. You dig a 6-mile tunnel and you are thinking about the far end. But a shaft is a well, and a well is a reason to build a house, and by that summer there were 410 people living along the tunnel line who had not been anywhere near Duncairn the autumn before. Shaft 11 has a smithy. Shaft 19 has a bakehouse and an argument about a boundary that came to my court in June and took 11 minutes. Osric calls them the beads. Nobody else does, but Osric writes the returns, so in the returns they are the beads. And in the 4th week of that summer the Dominion said something to me that I had been waiting 18 months to hear. Intake cap, 2,000 lifted. Constraint, water cleared. Sustainable population at current works, 6,400. 18 months earlier that same decree had come back at me with a line across it, constraint, water. This decree cannot be fulfilled, which is the only time in 3 years the system has ever told me flatly that I could not have a thing. I had chosen to take it as a schedule rather than a judgment, and said so out loud at the time, mostly to keep my nerve up. It was a schedule. It took 14 months and 304 holes, 6,400. I sat and looked at that number for a while. I have 1,911 people. There are 12,000 souls on 6 failing grants within 80 miles of my wall, and they are not dying, they are leaving. And for 18 months I have had to turn families away at my own gate with a written order in my own hand because I could not water them. Myra made me stand at the gate and watch it happen the first time. 9 families. She has never once mentioned it since, which is worse than if she had. I sent for Osric and had the cap struck out of the charter that afternoon, and had it read aloud in the square 4 times, and gave a copy to every carter and ferryman and drover and peddler who came through that month, which is not enticement. It is a fact, handed to men who travel. 206 people came in the first 6 weeks in the middle of a harvest, which is not the season anybody moves in. The second thing that happened that summer was Corbel, and it is the reason I was in a position to go anywhere at all. Corbel is Lord Perrin Rennick's steward. He is also the man who has been embezzling from Rennick for 4 years, which I said out loud at a feast 18 months ago in front of 40 people, and which I have thought about a great deal since, because saying it was the most expensive sentence of my life. Corbel has a man inside Duncairn. I have known which man for 11 months. I have not touched him. Hugh wrote the doctrine at the top of the counterintelligence page in his own hand, and it is one line: a discovered channel is worth more open than closed. And it took me a fortnight to stop wanting to hang somebody and start doing arithmetic. So that summer we used it properly for the first time. The quiet office fed that channel a picture of Duncairn. The tunnel is running at about a third of what we had hoped. 2 of the shaft heads have gone brackish, and the Warden has capped intake again and is very quiet about it. None of that is true. All of it is the sort of thing a frightened lord tells nobody, and a spy is delighted to find out. It came back to us in 19 days, which is how we know the channel runs Duncairn to Corbel to Blackmore and not the other way about, because a grain factor on the coast repeated the brackish shafts to Captain Maeve as a thing he had heard from a man at Blackmore. 19 days, and I know the route, and I know the price of everything I put into it. Osric hated the whole business and now defends it hardest, which is his pattern. Hugh, who was a coerced spy himself before he was my counterspy, put it more plainly than I would have. They are not paying for what is true, my lord. They are paying for what they can act on. Give them something they can act on and they will stop looking for the rest. What it bought me was a month. If Voss and Rennick believe my water has failed, then a warden of the Ashmarch riding north with 30 men in the winter is a desperate man going to beg, and desperate men going to beg are not worth interrupting. I would like to record that I did not plan any of that in order to leave. I built it because it was correct. It was only afterwards, standing in a workroom with nothing in my hands, that I noticed I had arranged a month of freedom for myself and had not asked what I meant to do with it. Gareth found me in the yard that week and told me something I did not want to hear, which is the only thing Sir Gareth has ever been reliably good for. He had my sword in his hand. He had taken it off the peg in my workroom where it had been living, and he turned it so I could see the edge in the light. There is rust in the fuller, my lord. Not on the edge you keep the edge because you can see the edge. In the groove where you would have to look. I said I had been busy. Gareth said that he had been at Duncairn for 3 years and 11 months, and that in the first year I had come to the yard 4 mornings in 5 and been beaten like a drum and come back, and that in the last year he had seen me in the yard 11 times. You have got very good at the things that can be done sitting down. I want to be fair to myself here, because I think the accusation was about 2/3 true and the missing third matters. I had not stopped because I had got lazy. I had stopped because the sword had stopped being the thing that saved anybody. In that first year out here, a man with a sword was the difference between a village and a burned field. By this winter the difference was a wall, and a survey, and 240 men who could march 26 miles in a day and arrive able to fight. I had learned the actual lesson of the frontier, which is that almost nothing is decided by the man at the front with the blade. But I had learned it too well. Because there is one thing out here that a wall will not stop and a survey will not answer, and I had known it for 2 years and I had been quietly not thinking about it. So that evening I opened the book. I keep a book. Not the ledgers, those are Osric's, and there are 11 of them now, and they are better kept than anything I have ever owned. This is small and it lives in my coat and it has one job. When something crosses my desk that will not make sense and I cannot make it make sense that day, I write it down and I leave it alone. There were 22 things in it. Most of them are boring, and 2 of them were not, and they were on facing pages, and I had never once read them together. The left-hand page was 7 words in my own hand, from the morning after the tunnel ran. Harrogate has not lost a tenant in 6 years. The right-hand page was from a night 4 months before that, and there were 4 words on it, and then a line I had scratched through twice. It is in the water. I sat down with those 2 pages open, and I did not go to bed. I need to explain the right-hand page because I have never written it down anywhere else and I have told no living person. At the end of the tunnel year, on a night when nobody was awake, I took a stoppered jar of water from the dead ground west of the old spring, gray water, blighted water, the kind that kills a field, and I set it on my bench and I kindled the aura and I put my hand in it. It took about 4 gallons out of the gray. It cost me 2 days flat on my back and a week of feeling as though the marrow of my arm had been left outside. But the water was clean. Not better. Clean. Bram tested it 11 ways without ever being told where it came from and drank it, and told me it was the best water in the barony. So I have known for a year that the gray can be taken out of water, and that I am carrying the thing that takes it. And it has been completely useless, and I want to be honest about why, because it is the whole reason I did nothing with it for a year. 4 gallons. A spring puts out 4,000 a day. A river is a joke. If I stood in the gray water and gave everything I have until it killed me, I would clean a stretch of it for about as long as it takes the next water to arrive. I was not holding a solution. I was holding a very expensive demonstration of a fact. And the second reason, which is worse, I could not do it when I wanted to. That is the part nobody outside a fight understands about aura. It is not a tool you pick up. In 3 years it had come to me 11 times, and every single one of those times something had been in the middle of trying to kill me. It came in the funnel at Duncairn. It came on the flats. It came in the pass. It came at the water that once, and I have never been able to explain that one, and I stopped trying. I could not light it in a yard on a Tuesday. Not once. Not ever. I had tried perhaps 200 times. I asked Gareth about it in the first year, and he gave me the answer that every man in the Empire would give me, and he was not being lazy, and he was not wrong. 20 years, my lord. That is the answer, and it is the only answer. You drill until your arms are meat, and you fight until you have been frightened enough times that your body stops asking permission. There is no other road. There has never been another road. That is how every knight in Valdrin climbs the kindling. Hollow, spark, ember, flame, and up. A master watches you and tells you when you are ready, and how he knows is that he has been watching men for 40 years, and the whole thing is passed hand to hand by eye, exactly the way well digging was passed hand to hand before I came out here, and found that not one man in this world had ever written down what a gradient was. And that is the thought that finally arrived at about the 4th hour of that night, and it arrived the way they do, which is sideways and about something else. Nobody in this world has ever measured aura. Not once. Not badly. There is no number anywhere in the Empire. There are 8 rank names that everyone knows by heart, and they are assigned by an old man's opinion, and beneath the names there is nothing at all. No scale. No log. Nobody has ever sat down and asked what changes exactly between one attempt and the next. They cannot. It is invisible, it happens inside a man, and the only instrument anybody has ever had for it is a master's eye. I have an instrument. I have had it since the first morning, and I have used it for ground and for men and for grain, and I had never once turned it on myself and treated the answer as data rather than as a verdict. Aura rank, ember. State, banked. Channel, closed. Banked, not absent. Not none. It had been saying banked for 2 years, and I had read it the way you read a label, and it is not a label. It is a reading. It is the same word Bram uses for a fire you have covered for the night, and a banked fire is not an unlit one, and the difference between them is not fuel. So I did what I would have done to any other craft in this world that people perform by feel. I ran the trials. 41 of them over 9 nights in the locked room past the tannery, written down in a ruled book like the level checks on the aqueduct. Date, hour, what I had eaten, whether I was rested, whether I was frightened and how, and I made myself frightened in 11 different ways, some of which I am not going to describe, whether I was angry, whether Gareth had been at me that day, what I was holding, what was in the room. And on the 10th night I laid the sheet out and read down the column of the 11 times in 3 years it had ever come, and then down the column of what was in the room, and it was so obvious that I sat there for a while feeling like a man who has walked past the same door for a decade. Every single time it had ever lit, there had been blight in the room. The funnel, the reavers were nothing, but a blight beast came up out of the west flat that night, and I have never written about it because it went for a horse and not for me. The flats, the pass, and the water on the bench, which had never made sense to me for a year, because there was no danger in that room at all. There was a jar. It has never been answering fear. Fear was riding alongside it for 3 years because on this frontier the two things arrived together, and I had done what everybody does with a correlation, which is to marry it and stop asking questions. It answers the gray, which makes perfect, terrible sense, and I sat in that cold room and made myself say the rest of it out loud. The Dominion has told me since the first week that this thing in me is sealed and beyond measure and dangerous and mine to open. It has never once told me what it is for, and a talent that kindles in the presence of one specific thing and unmakes that thing when it touches it and does nothing at all otherwise is not a gift. It is a tool. Somebody made it for a job. I have written that in the book and I have not written the next sentence. But the practical end of it, the end I could use the next morning, was very simple, and it is the reason this winter is the one that mattered. I do not need a monster. I need a jar. 400 years of nights climbed that ladder the hard way, and the answer was sitting on a shelf. If you want to see what he does with it, the like button helps this reach people who would enjoy it. I am going to be brief about the next 3 months, because it was the least dramatic work I have ever done, and it changed more than the tunnel did. Every morning in a locked stone room, before anyone else in the barony was awake, I set a stoppered jar of blighted water on the bench, and I lit the fire in my chest and I held it. That is all. That is the entire method. The first morning I held it for 11 seconds and could not close my hand for an hour. By the 9th morning I could go a minute. By the 40th I could kindle it in about 2 heartbeats and hold it for as long as I could hold my arm up, which was the limiting factor by then, and is a very stupid problem to have and one I solved with a bench and a strap. Here is the log because I kept one, and because the shape of it is the argument. Morning 1, 11 seconds. Could not close my right hand for an hour afterward and had to have Watt cut my meat at supper like a child, and told him it was a bad grip from the leveling instruments which he did not believe. Morning 9, a minute. The first time I have ever held that fire on purpose for longer than it takes to kill something. Morning 14, 2 minutes, and then the discovery that the limit was not the fire. It was my arm. I was standing there holding a sword out at a jar like an idiot, and the thing that made me stop was a shoulder, which is the single most humiliating sentence in this account. I built a bench with a padded rest and a strap that night and never had that problem again. Morning 22, 11 minutes, and the first change in the reading. Morning 31. I stopped needing the sword. That one took me by surprise and it should not have. I had assumed the blade mattered because every night in the world channels through a blade, and every night in the world channels through a blade because a knight is a man with a sword, and nobody has ever had a reason to check. It goes into anything. It went into a poker, and into the strap of the bench, and on the 34th morning it went down my arm and out through the flat of my hand into the water directly, with no steel involved anywhere, which as far as I am aware is not a thing anybody in Valdrin believes is possible. Morning 40, 2 heartbeats to light, and 40 minutes at a quarter strength without any real cost. That was the morning I understood I had crossed from doing a thing to having a thing, and I sat on the floor for a while. And somewhere in the middle of all that came the 2 findings that mattered more than the rank did, and neither of them was what I was looking for. The first, it reads quantity, not just presence. I had been using a full jar because more seemed better, and when I started varying it, I found the reading varied with it, cleanly and in proportion. A thimble of gray in a bucket reads faint. A cup reads stronger. The same cup in half the water reads stronger again, which means it is not a bell that rings or does not ring. It is a gauge. It tells me how much, and I can compare one water against another, and I checked that against Bram's clay cups from the tunnel, the ones he depth samples with, and it agreed with him 11 times out of 11 on which of 2 waters was worse, and Bram was going by taste and 41 years, and I was going by a feeling in my chest. The second, it reads through water far better than through anything else. I tried it on dead ground. I brought in a lump of the gray crust off the west flat, dry in a box, and set it on the bench and lit up, and it barely registered. Less than a thimble of gray water. A lump of the actual thing, and it was quieter than a cup of dirty liquid. Then I wetted it, and it shouted. I wrote that down on the 51st morning and put a line under it and did not understand it for 3 months. It is the whole answer. It was sitting in my own log, underlined all summer. The gray is not in the ground, it is in the water in the ground, and dry blighted soil is a corpse of the thing rather than the thing itself, which is why my flame can barely hear it and why nothing anybody has ever tried on the surface has made the slightest difference. I did not see it. I had it written down in my own hand and I did not see it because I was busy climbing a ladder. I want to put the numbers down because the numbers are the whole point. In 3 years of fighting on this frontier, in a place people call a grave, I had kindled the aura 11 times. In the first 11 weeks in that room, I kindled it 406 times. Every knight in the Empire climbs this ladder by being nearly killed often enough. That is not a discipline. It is a lottery with a long enough run of tickets, and it takes 20 years because being nearly killed is, thank God, a rare event even out here. The whole method is built on scarcity. Nobody has ever improved it because nobody has ever been able to cause the thing that lights the fire. I could cause it. It was in a jar on a bench, and there is a whole dead country of it 11 miles west, free, in unlimited supply, and the only man in the world who could use that fact was me, because I was the only one whose flame answered to it and the only one with an instrument that could tell me whether the morning had done anything. That last part matters more than it sounds. I could see the reading. Every morning after, I could ask the Dominion what had moved. Most mornings the answer was nothing, and on a normal man's method he would never know that, and he would keep doing the useless version for another decade because his master's eye cannot see a 1% change either. I could. So I ran it like a works program. I changed one thing at a time and kept what moved the number. 3 things moved it, and none of them are what a swordsman would have guessed. Holding beats striking. Every instinct in the yard says use it, cut something, put it through a post. Gareth's whole training is that the aura is an edge. But the reading moved on the mornings I did nothing at all except hold it lit and not spend it, and it moved most when I held it past the point where it wanted to go out. Not effort, duration. It is a fire, and you do not build a fire up by taking coals off it. Small and steady beat big. A hard flare that emptied me set the number back for 2 days. The mornings that paid were the ones where I kept it low and even at about a quarter of what I could do for a long time. I have built enough things to know what that pattern is. That is not exercise. That is curring. You do not dry green timber fast, you dry it slowly or you split it. And it wanted less blight than I thought. I started with a full jar because more seemed better. It is not. A thimble at arm's length worked as well as a gallon under my hand, and the big jar cost me more to hold against. It is not fuel. It is a signal. Some part of this thing in me is listening for the gray, and it only needs to hear it, not be buried in it. On the 79th morning the reading changed, and I sat down on the floor of that room and put my head against the cold stone and laughed like an idiot for about a minute, alone, at 5 in the morning, in a locked shed that smells of tanning. Aura rank, ember to flame channel, open, sustained. Note, the flame no longer sits beyond the blade. It is in it. Ember was a corona, 3 feet of cold silver standing off the steel, and it unmade blight matter, and it was the most frightening thing I have ever carried. Flame is not more of that. It is the light going into the metal. The blade does not glow so much as it stops being ordinary. It goes the color of the inside of a cloud, and the edge of it becomes hard to look at directly, and there is no corona at all anymore. The first time I lit it properly, I did not mean to cut anything. I was standing at the bench with it up, looking at it, the way you look at a tool that has changed in your hand. And I brought it down on the end of the bench in the way you would tap a table to make a point, no weight in it at all, a gesture. And it went through 4 inches of seasoned oak, and the half-inch iron strap bound round the end of it and about 2 inches into the stone floor beneath. I did not feel the iron. That is the part I keep coming back to. I felt the oak faintly, the way you feel a candle when your hand passes through the flame. The iron was not there. I stood in a locked shed at 5 in the morning holding a sword, with the end of my own bench lying on the floor in 2 pieces, and I said something out loud that I am not going to write down. Then I did it 11 more times on offcuts, because I have learned to distrust the first result of anything, and it did it 11 more times. Ember could not do that. Ember was a corona that unmade blight and did nothing whatsoever to iron. I had put it against a horseshoe in the second year out of curiosity, and it had been like waving a lamp at it. This is a different thing wearing the same color. Gareth sits at Ember and on his very best day in the sun with his blood up at flame. I did not tell him, not for 11 days. And when I finally did tell him, out in the yard at dusk with nobody watching, I did not say it, I showed him, and Sir Gareth, who has been beating me around a yard for 4 years, who was the first man alive to notice the flicker in me and the only one who never once made a joke about the hollow air, went down on one knee in the dirt of my own yard, and I had to go and get him up, and neither of us said anything at all for a while. Then he asked me how, and I told him. All of it, the jar and the book and the 406 mornings. He was quiet for a long time, and then Gareth said the thing that I have thought about every week since. Then every man who ever stalled at Spark and died a hedge knight did so because nobody could see the number. 400 years of us, my father, half the men I have ever known. And then he said the other thing, and this is the one that put a cold hand on the back of my neck. Gareth said, "Do not ever tell a great house that this can be taught, my lord. There is no army in the world worth what an army of flames would be worth. They would not want the jar. They would want you and a room." 11 days after the bench, I nearly lost the whole barony, and the only reason I did not is that I had got into the habit of putting my hand in water. It had become a tick by then. 400 mornings will do that. I would be walking the tunnel line on some ordinary errand, and I would stop at a shaft collar, drop the bucket, kindle for a heartbeat, and read it, not because I expected anything, but the way a man taps a wheel he is walking past. Shaft 209 is 11 miles out, up near Cold Fell, 3 from the tunnel head. There are 9 houses at it. It is the second to last of the beads and the highest, and I only stopped there because Ren Alder wanted me to look at a collar that was spalling. I dropped the bucket and I kindled, and the water was wrong. Not much. If you have never done it, you would not understand the scale of the thing, so let me put it the way I would put a load. 4 gallons out of the dead ground west of the spring reads like a shout. This read like somebody speaking 2 rooms away. I stood there with my hand in a bucket for about 10 seconds, and then I asked Ren very calmly how long it took water to run from the tunnel head to the town. He said about 9 days. I have never in either life felt anything like the next few minutes, because I could see the whole of it laid out, the way I see a load path, and it was very simple and it was very bad. The Connaught is one system. It has one mother well at the head, 3 miles above where I was standing, and everything below it drinks from the same tunnel. There is no valve. There is no second line. I did not build one because a Connaught does not need one, and because it never once occurred to me that the thing I was defending against might come down the pipe. 1,911 people, 410 of them strung along that line in 11 villages. All of them on one tunnel, 14 months in the digging, and something was in the water at the top of it. 9 days. Here is the part I want to set down properly, because it is the whole argument for everything I did in that locked room all summer. Nobody else in the world could have known. There is no test for it. The water at 209 was clear. It had no smell and no taste, and Bram would have drunk it and told me it was good, and he would have been right by every instrument this world has ever possessed. 6 weeks from then, a field somewhere down the line would have gone gray, and everyone would have said the gray had come to the Ashmarch at last, and they would have been wrong about how, and by then it would have been in every cistern in Duncairn. 4 months earlier I could not have found it either. I could only kindle when something was killing me, and no one has ever been killed by a bucket. I went up the line that night with Kessa, Ren, 6 men and a lantern, testing every shaft. 209, wrong. 214, wrong. 220, wrong and worse. 226, which is the last collar before the mother well, wrong, and by then it was not a voice 2 rooms away, it was a voice in the next chair. The mother well itself at 4 in the morning in the rain with the lantern hissing. I put my hand in it and it was like putting my hand on a bell that was already ringing. We went down. A Connaught's mother well is a shaft about 6 feet across and at Cold Fell 91 feet deep with a gallery at the bottom running back into the hill where the water comes in through the face. I have been down it perhaps 40 times. Gareth has forbidden it perhaps 40 times. The face was gray. Not the water, the rock. 11 feet of the working face and the floor in front of it had gone that flat felted gray, and it was in the seams and it was wet, and every drop coming through it was coming through that. Kessa was on the ladder above me with the lantern and she asked me, in a voice I had not heard from her since she was 14, whether we had lost it. And I want to record exactly what I felt because it was not despair. I have had despair in that tunnel. I had it on the day of the third collapse and I had it the week the brine came in at shaft 90. What I felt was something closer to being handed a bill I had already saved up for, because I had spent all summer, 406 times, in a locked room, learning to hold a fire against a jar of exactly this, and I had not known why. I had told myself it was for the latter. I had told myself it was ambition, or vanity, or the itch of a man with a solved problem and nothing to do. It was for this. It had been for this the whole time. I sent everyone up the ladder, all of them. Kessa argued and Wren argued and I put them up the ladder and then I stood on the floor of my own mother well 91 feet under Cold Fell in the dark with the water round my boots. And I lit it, not the flare, not the thing I had done to the bench. The other thing, the low, even, quarter-strength hold I had spent 11 weeks learning because the number moved when I did it and I had no idea what it was for. I put the blade in the water at the foot of the face, and I held it there for a long time. I have no measure of how long. Kessa says 40 minutes. It did not feel like 40 minutes, and it did not feel like 4. What I remember is that the silver went into the water and stayed in it and spread, the way heat goes into a bath, not fast, not dramatic, just steadily arriving everywhere, and that where it arrived the gray stopped being a thing and started being wet rock. The face came clean from the bottom upward. The last of it to go was a patch about the size of a door up in the north corner where the seam comes in, and that one fought and I put more into it and it went. Then I sat down in 8 inches of freezing water at the bottom of my own well and could not get up for a while, and Kessa came down the ladder against orders, which I had entirely expected. We tested the whole line for the next 4 days, every shaft, twice a day. It came back clean and it has stayed clean. I want to be exact about what that was and what it was not, because I have caught myself twice since telling it as though I saved the barony with a sword, and that is not what happened. It was not strength. Flame did not do that. A low, steady hold did that, and I could have done the same at Ember if I had known to, and if I could have lit it on demand, and I could not. It was not luck either, though it looks like it. It was a habit. It was 400 mornings of a man putting his hand in water until putting his hand in water stopped being a decision. The gray did not come down my tunnel because I was clever. It was found because I was in the habit of tapping the wheel. And the third thing, which I did not say to anybody for a month. The gray came into the mother well from the northwest face, through the seam, from ground 3 miles beyond anything Kessa had mapped, on a line nobody was watching. It did not come at my wall. It did not come at my fields. It came at my water. Out of 400 square miles it found the one thing that everything I have built depends on, and it came in underground, where no man on this frontier could have seen it. And if I had been 11 days later about it, I would have lost the Ashmarch without ever seeing an enemy. I have thought about that a great deal, and I have written it in the book, and I have not written anything underneath it. So I came out of that summer with a fire I could light on command and a lot of unspent attention, and I turned it on the left-hand page of the book. Harrogate has not lost a tenant in 6 years. Here is why that sentence would not leave me alone. I run a good town. I know I run a good town, not because I am proud of it, but because I have the numbers, and the numbers are not ambiguous. People come to Duncairn. Last year 448 of them came, and people leave Duncairn. 31 left last year. That is the part that matters. 31 people walked out of the best-fed, best-watered, most lawful settlement on this frontier and went anyway. A girl went east to marry a man in Kelmere. A cooper went to the coast because his brother was dying. Two families went for no reason I was ever given, and I asked, and they were polite, and they went. That is what a good place looks like. Some people leave. They leave to marry, to nurse a mother, to follow a trade, to get away from a neighbor, because they are unhappy in a way that has nothing to do with you. You cannot build a place so good that nobody ever wants to be somewhere else. Wanting to be somewhere else is a thing people simply do. Harrogate had 940 people. In 6 years, not one of them had gone anywhere. I sent Wat Hallow for Osric, and Master Osric came up from the counting room with ink on 2 fingers, and the look he gets when I have interrupted a column. He is 61. He was sent out here by my father to watch me die, and he stayed to keep my books, and he is the only man in Duncairn who is never impressed by me. You have that face. The last time you had that face, I spent a winter costing a tunnel that every well man in the province called a hole for money. I asked him for 6 years of frontier returns, all 7 grants, everything the crown had, everything he could get out of the assessor's copies, everything Kessa could buy on the coast. He asked what I was looking for. I said I did not know yet, which is the honest answer and the one that always annoys him. Osric said, "Then I shall bring you all of it, and you will read for a week, and on the 8th day you will tell me it was obvious." It took 9 days. He was close. Here is what 6 years of frontier returns look like if you have never had the misfortune. Thornhold's numbers go up and down like a man breathing. Good year, bad year, a fire in the 4th, a recovery after. Kelmere loses people steadily, and honestly, you can watch that grant dying in the column, 4% a year and 6 in the last 2. Blackmore is a mess, because Voss farms his own people and a farmed man's ledger looks like a farm. Idris Hales swings hard because Idris gambles. Salter Danes creeps up slowly, the way a careful man's does. Mine goes up like a wall because I have been taking everybody else's people since the charter went up. And Harrogate is a straight line, not a good line. I want to be clear about that because I got it wrong for 2 days and it cost me. Harrogate is not the richest grant out here. It is not the best fed. Its revenue is middling and always has been. Aymer pays his dues on time, pays exactly what he owes, and has never once been assessed above his neighbors. It is smooth. 6 years, 940 people, and the count moves by 3 or 4 and comes back. Births roughly match deaths. Revenue moves with the weather and with nothing else. I have spent 2 lives around numbers that describe real things, and there is one rule that has never failed me. Real things are noisy. A real harvest has a bad year in it. A real village has a year where the fever comes through and takes 11, and a year where 4 girls marry at once and go. Reality is lumpy. Reality has a fire in it, somewhere in 6 years. Osric taught me how to read these 3 years ago, and his method is worth setting down because it is not what anybody expects. You do not read a return by looking at the numbers. You read it by looking at how the numbers move, and then by asking what kind of man would produce that movement. Any fool can forge a number, my lord. Almost nobody can forge a pattern, because to forge a pattern you have to understand what an honest one looks like, and a man who understood that would generally not be stealing. So we spent 2 evenings doing the thing he calls reading the men out of the ledger, and I enjoyed it more than I have enjoyed anything on paper in 3 years. Fenwick Auber owes a Lowmark house money, and you can see the debt in his returns the way you can see a limp in a man's boots. Every 3rd year his revenue jumps and his population does not, which means he has sold something, timber most likely, because it recovers just slowly enough. He has sold the same wood 4 times in 11 years, and there will not be a 5th. The Ormont brothers have 4 years of a lawsuit in their columns. You can watch 2 men spend more on lawyers than the bridge between them would have cost, without anybody ever writing the word bridge. Bertram's voice stopped. That is the only word for it. His returns are identical for 6 years, not smooth, identical to the mark, which means he stopped counting and started copying out last year's figures, and the Chancery has never once noticed, which tells you everything about how closely anybody is watching this frontier. And Aldous Crane's returns are the most interesting thing I have ever read, and I still do not know what they mean. They are meticulous. They are more detailed than the Chancery requires by a factor of about 3. He reports things nobody reports, cart loads by destination, the number of days his mill ran. He is either the most conscientious man on this coast, or he is hiding something inside a great deal of true information, which is exactly what I would do, and I have not decided which, and it has been 2 years. So I turned the method on Harrogate, and my first answer was wrong. My first answer was fraud. A smooth line nearly always means a man copying last year's figures with small variations to make them look alive. I was fairly sure I had found a competent version of Bertram voice, and I was rather pleased with myself. It took Osric about an hour to take that away from me. A forged return is smooth in the wrong places. The forger smooths what he thinks matters, the revenue, the head count, and forgets that a real village's numbers are lumpy in 100 small ways he has never had to think about. Births do not track deaths. Tithe arrears come and go. The number of hearths does not move in step with the number of souls. Harrogate's book is lumpy everywhere except one place. The births are noisy. The deaths are noisy. The marriages are noisy. The arrears, there are none, which is strange, but strange in a way that points at a lord who forgives rather than one who lies. The hearths move. Every single thing in that return that a forger would have had to know about and would have got wrong is right, and messy, and alive. And the population still comes out to the same number every year. Osric said, "That is not a man copying a figure, my lord. Every part of that book is true, which means whatever is happening in the world and not on the paper, and the paper is telling you about it honestly, and it is the only honest account of the thing that exists anywhere." A straight line means one of 2 things. Either nothing whatever is happening, or somebody is doing work to keep the line straight. And something was very definitely happening at Harrogate, because Kessa came back from the west 3 days later, and what she carried turned the question inside out. Kessa Roan had been out on the Western Front for 5 weeks with 6 people, a chain, and the leveling instruments I built for the tunnel. She was a scout when I found her stealing food at 14, which meant she was very good at coming back alive with a rough idea of what she had seen. She is not a scout now. She is a surveyor, and the difference is that a surveyor comes back with a number that another person can check. She put the sheet on my table and did not sit down, which told me most of it. Kessa said, 4 miles a year is wrong, my lord. 4 miles a year is what it does where somebody is watching. She said the front is not a line. That was the first thing, and it was the thing I had been wrong about for 3 years. I had been carrying a picture in my head of a tide, a straight gray edge coming east at a walking pace, 4 miles in a year, the way it came at the west spring. It is not a tide. It is a hand with fingers. She had walked 90 miles of it. In places it had come 2 miles in 6 years. In others, low ground, wet ground, old ground with standing water in it. It had come 11 miles in a single year, and then stopped, and sat, and put out fingers along the stream beds while nobody counted, because nobody out here counts anything. Kessa said it follows water, not roads, not soil, and I tested soil because I thought it was soil for a fortnight. Water, every place it has moved fast, it moved along a wet line. I want to be honest about what I felt because it was not fear. It was the other thing. The one I have felt perhaps 6 times in this life and 4 in the last, the feeling of a locked door coming open under your hand. Because if it follows water, then it is not weather. Weather does not follow anything. Weather simply arrives. A thing that follows water is a thing that travels, and a thing that travels can be rooted and blocked and sent somewhere you would rather it went. Every dry mile becomes a wall you did not have to build. I asked for her map. Kessa said the map was the problem and put it down. It is good work. 90 miles of front in 5 weeks, chained and leveled, with dates of arrival marked wherever a village would swear to one. The gray comes east across the whole sheet in a dozen crooked fingers, some of them very long, and at the northern end of that sheet there is a shape cut out of it. A clean shape, 7 miles by 5, with the gray lying hard against 3 sides of it and none at all inside. I asked her what the boundary was. Kessa said that is Harrogate, Lord Gaunt Aymer's ground. I walked the whole southern hedge of it. The gray comes up to the ditch on the far side and it stops, not thins, stops. You can stand with one boot in dead ground and one in winter barley. I put her sheet down on top of Osric's returns and looked at the two of them together for a while. A grant that loses nobody, a gray that stops at a hedge, and a straight line in a ledger where there should be noise. Osric argued when I called it, which is his job. You are a warden proposing to ride uninvited onto another warden's ground on the strength of a tidy column. Gaunt Aymer has given the crown no cause in 20 years. If you are wrong, you will have insulted the only man on this frontier who has never once moved against you. I said I was not going to accuse him of anything. I was going to go and look at his ground in the open as a neighbor with an escort and ask him how he had kept the gray off it, which was, I pointed out, a question I had an entirely honest reason to ask, since the same gray was 14 months from my aqueduct head. Osric looked at me for a while. That is a true reason, and you mean it, and it is still not why you are going. He was right, but it was true, and I have learned that a true reason you actually mean is the only kind worth traveling on. I was 4 days from leaving for Harrogate when the Reavers came back onto the salt, and they did not come for Duncairn. They came for the beads. Kessa's people brought it in on a Tuesday, 600 riders moving southeast along the old dry watercourse 2 days out. Not a raid. A raid is 40 men and a night. 600 horse moving as one body with remounts and a baggage string is a host, and it is the second time in 2 years I have seen one, and both times it has meant the same thing. The gray has taken something out west that those people used to live on, and they are being pushed onto my ground because there is nowhere else left to be pushed. And they had learned. That is the part that frightened Gareth and should have frightened me faster. 2 years ago they came at my wall, sat in front of it for 9 days, and went home hungry, because a wall with 240 trained men behind it is not a thing 600 tired horsemen can do anything about. They were not coming at my wall. They were coming at 11 villages strung along 11 miles of open salt, none of them walled, 410 people living at the shaft heads, because a shaft is a well, and a well is a reason to build a house. And every one of those houses was there because I had put a hole in the ground and told people it was safe. Gareth put it in one sentence at the table that night, and he was not being dramatic. He was doing arithmetic out loud. 240 men, my lord, and 11 miles. That is 21 men to a village. 21 men hold a village against 600 for about as long as it takes them to die in front of it. He was right. I ran it 4 different ways that night and every one came out the same. I could not defend the beads, not with men. Concentrate and I lose 10 villages to save one. Spread and I lose all 11 a village at a time. Pull them all back inside the wall, and I save the people and lose the shaft heads, and the shaft heads are the tunnel, and a canot with the collars broken and the spoil pushed back down the shafts is 14 months of work, and 304 holes gone in a night by men who would not even know what they were wrecking. There is no arrangement of 240 men that answers that. I want to be plain about it because it matters for what I did. This was not a fight I chose to win the clever way. It was a fight I could not win, which brought me at about 2 in the morning to the stone shed past the tannery with 2 locks on it. I have had 2 rules written on the wall of that shed since the day I started it, larger than anything else I own. 1. It never leaves the Ashmarch. Voss does not need to steal this. He needs to see it once. 2. It is never used in a fight I could win without it. I had written the second rule to stop myself, and Kessa had told me to my face that I would break it inside 2 years for something that felt urgent at the time, and I had been quietly certain she was wrong. She was wrong. It took 11 months, and it was not for something that felt urgent. It was for 410 people at 11 shaft heads and no other answer on the table. I opened the shed at dawn and I told Call what was actually in it, which was a conversation I had owed him for 11 months. He looked at the 4 barrels on their beds for a long moment, and then he asked me why I had let him think it was a pump. I said because I had not wanted to be the man who put this into the world, and had done it anyway, and had not wanted to say so out loud. Call, who was silenced for 10 years by a lord who did not want a smith with opinions, and who has never once let me get away with anything since, said the only thing he said about it that whole day. Then you should have told me 11 months ago, my lord, because I would have made the beds lighter and you would have had 6 of them by now. Here is what came out of that shed, and it is not what anybody in this world means by a cannon. The Empire's guns are cast. The hole is made by the casting, so the bore is out of round and no 2 are alike, and the ball is loose in it because it has to be loose, or it will not go down. Half the powder's push goes past the ball. Effective range is about 110 paces, which is why guns are for knocking on castle gates and nothing else, and why every knight in Valdren regards them as miners' work. Mine are bored. The hole is cut with a boring bar after the casting, so it is round and straight and the same in all 4. The ball fits. The trunnions sit on the center line, so the barrel does not want to jump. There is an elevating screw instead of a wedge and a hammer. None of that is a discovery. Every part of it could have been done in this world a century ago by anybody who cared to. The reason nobody has is that aura champions decide battles, so a weapon that lets a farm boy kill a knight at 800 paces is not a tool here. It is an obscenity. Nobody improves an obscenity, and the actual weapon is none of the above. The actual weapon is a book. 11 months of firing on the flats behind the tannery at measured distances with measured charges, writing down where the ball fell. 460 shots. Elevation in numbered turns of the screw, charge by weight, and the fall of shot against each pair. That is a range table, and once you have one, laying a gun stops being an old man's instinct that takes 30 years to acquire and becomes reading a number off a page. I gave the guns to Wat Hallow, who was a name on a roll in April 2 years ago, and to a 19-year-old called Aldric Vale who came in off the Kelmere with his mother in the second wave and who Osric flagged at intake, because the boy could do compound interest in his head and nobody had ever once asked him to. They had the tables by heart in 9 days. Not the guns, the tables. That is the whole of it. We put all 4 on the low rise at shaft 160, which is the only ground on that line with a view of the dry watercourse, and which I had chosen 11 months earlier, on paper, for exactly this, and hoped never to use. They came down the watercourse on the second morning in a column because the ground makes you come in a column, and they were 900 paces out when Aldric Vale read the number off his table and set the screws. The Empire says a gun reaches 110 paces. The first ball landed among the remount string at 860, and the entire host stopped moving as though the ground had spoken. I want to describe what happened next accurately, because it was not a battle and it would be dishonest to write it as one. Nothing came back. That is the whole of it. There was nothing they could do at that distance, and no experience anywhere in 600 men that told them what was happening or where it was coming from. One ball, then another, then a fourth, every 90 seconds, walking up and down a column that had no cover on open salt. They tried to close, which is correct and is what I would have done, and closing is 1,000 yards of open ground at a canter into a thing that is already ranged on it. They broke at about 400 paces and went northwest, and they did not come back, and I lost nobody at all. 11 shots, 2 hours. Nobody from Duncairn was hurt. I counted 31 of them dead on that flat and 11 horses, and I went out and walked it afterwards, which I have made myself do since the first battle. I am not going to pretend to a grief I do not have. Those men came to break 11 villages full of people who trust me, and I would do it again this afternoon. but I want to set down what I saw out there because it is the thing I have not been able to put down since. There was no fight. Not once. Not for a moment. 240 men who had drilled all summer stood on a rise and watched and did not draw and were not needed. A 19-year-old who has never held a sword and could not tell you which end of a spear to hold, who has no name and no blood and no aura and never will have any, read a number off a page and turned a screw, and 600 horsemen went away. Gareth stood beside me the whole time with his hand on his sword hilt and never took it off, and when it was over he said one thing, and it was not about the reavers. My father was a flame, my lord. 40 years to get there, and it killed him at 51. That boy has been here 5 months. I have written the treason down before, and I will write it once more, because the day I saw it happen is the day it stopped being a thought. Sergeants end men like Perrin Rennick, because a force that works without its lord does not need a champion. The mules end him, because speed beats blood. The quiet office ends him, because a house that cannot be bought cannot be ruled by a man whose only method is buying. And the range table ends him most of all, because it takes the thing that decides a battlefield and makes it teachable in 9 days to a boy who would otherwise have carried grain his whole life. That is not treason against the crown. The crown will not even notice for 30 years. It is treason against the arrangement, against the entire idea that some men are born to decide things and the rest are born to carry them, which is the load-bearing wall of every house in this empire, mine included. I broke my own second rule on a Tuesday for 410 people, and I would do it again. But I have 4 guns and 1 book, and there are 7 grants on this frontier and 11 great houses in the empire, and Idris Hale's letter came in 3 days later asking, very carefully, what exactly had happened on the salt. The first rule is the one that matters now. It never leaves the Ashmarch. I do not think I am going to be able to keep it. That was 1 hour of this. There are 2 more, and the frontier gets a great deal stranger. Subscribe if you want the rest of it. We went north with 30 men. Gareth wanted 80. Sir Gareth has one setting, which is more, and I have learned that his instinct is nearly always right about danger and nearly always wrong about politics. 80 men is an army arriving. 30 is a lord traveling. I took Tam, because Tam grew up a servant's son in a great house and can walk into a hall and tell you inside an hour whether the people in it are strict or frightened, and those 2 look identical from outside. I took Kessa, because I wanted that boundary walked again by somebody I trusted. I left Myra and Osric holding the town, which they do better than I do. Kasha Varen did not come, and told me why on the last evening in the yard. If Aymer is hiding something, he will hide it better from 2 of us than from 1. And if he is not, then I am worth a great deal more to you on the coast, buying up the grain contracts, than I am riding beside you looking clever. Then Kasha said the other thing, which I thought about for the whole 4 days. You are going because it does not make sense. That is a good reason, and it is also exactly how you will get killed. A man who cannot leave a puzzle alone can be led anywhere at all by anybody with a puzzle. The road north runs the old Herald Road for 2 days and then leaves it, and I want to describe what the frontier looks like from it, because it matters for what came after. You ride a day through Kelmir's southern edge, and you see what this whole coast has been looking at for 5 years. Not ruin would be easier to read. What you see is subtraction. A village of 30 houses with 9 of them shut, the thatch gone gray and sagging, the gardens gone to dock and nettle, and the other 21 lived in by people who are perfectly alive and simply fewer than they were. And you see hedges that have not been laid in 4 years. That is the tell out here. Not hunger. Hedges. Laying a hedge is 2 days of hard work by a man who believes he will still be standing there in 5 years and will want it thick. You can read a grant's entire opinion of its own future and whether anybody has bothered. We stopped the second night at a place called Wither, 11 houses, because their mill leat had silted and they were hand grinding, and a woman told Gareth about it while she was selling him eggs in the tone of somebody describing the weather. I looked at it for about 10 minutes. The leat had not silted. The leat was fine. Somebody 4 years ago had repaired the sluice with a board an inch and a half too tall, so the head was down by that much, and the wheel was turning at about half speed and had been for 4 years. And 11 households had been grinding barley by hand every day since, because the man who did it was dead and nobody had ever measured anything. 2 of my men and a saw fixed it before supper. I mention it because of what the miller said. He was about 50 and he watched the wheel come up to speed, and he did not thank me. He asked me carefully what I wanted for it. I said nothing. And he did not believe me, and he was polite about not believing me, and we rode out the next morning with him standing in his doorway watching us go in case we came back for the price. That is what 5 years of Lords has done out here. It should have told me everything I needed to know about how the next week would go, and it did not, because I am a slow learner about people and a fast one about ground. We met the first of them on the second afternoon, 11 miles north of Wither, going the other way. 9 people, 2 families and a man on his own who had attached himself to them somewhere back down the road. They had a handcart with a chest on it and a child asleep on top of the chest, and they came off the road to let 30 armed men past, the way you do, and stood in the wet grass with their heads down and waited for us to be gone. I stopped, which frightened them badly, and it took me a while to undo that. They were going to Duncairn. They had come out of a village in the northern Kelmere 11 days before, and they had the actual terms, in the actual words, near enough that somebody had had them read aloud to them more than once. A week's food and dry shelter and a hot meal before any questions. Plot and roof timber and the loan of tools in the first year. 40 labor days owed. Tithe from the second year at a share posted publicly that cannot be raised without the whole town watching it change. And freehold in the 7th. The man on his own asked me, not knowing who I was because I had not said, and because a warden on a winter road in a plain coat is just a man with soldiers, whether it was true about the 7th year. I said it was. He said that he had heard it was true, and that he had also heard it was a trick, and that he had walked 11 days on it anyway because his alternative was to stop where he was. I want to write down what that felt like, and I find I cannot do it without sounding pleased with myself, so I will put down the useful part instead. Nobody sent for them. That is the whole of the charter, and it is the only reason it is lawful. I have never put a recruiter on another lord's ground, and I never will, because the moment I do it is enticement of villains, and a real court will take my barony off me and be right too. All I have ever done is make the terms known on my own land and hand them to men who travel. 11 days, unmanaged, on a rumor carried by carters. I gave them a written pass for the ferry and told them to ask for Wren Alder at the shaft heads, and then I asked the question I had actually stopped for, and I asked it as casually as I could manage. I asked where else people were leaving from. They were happy to answer. Kelmere, obviously, and the northern Kelmere worst. 2 families out of the Ormont ground because of the bridge. Some from Blackmore still, though fewer than there were. A man from Fenwick Aubers Grant who had gone to the coast instead. I asked about Harrogate. And the older woman, she was perhaps 50 and she had done most of the talking, looked at me as though I had asked something slightly foolish, and said the thing that I have not been able to get out of my head since. Nobody comes from Harrogate, my lord. Not to your place, not to the coast, not anywhere. There's no one on this road out of Harrogate, and there never has been. I asked whether that was because they were content. She thought about it properly, which I did not expect, and then she said that she supposed so, and that she had a cousin who had married into Elderhithe 8 or 9 years back, and that they had stopped hearing from her, and that people do stop writing. Then she said, people do stop writing, and shrugged and moved the child's blanket up, and that was the end of it as far as she was concerned. 9 days later I found her cousin's name in a parish register with nothing after it. We camped that night in the lee of a broken sheepfold, and Gareth made me work, which he had been doing every night since we left and which I had been resenting like a boy. He is not drilling me the way he drilled me in the first year. In the first year it was footwork and being hit. Now it is one thing, over and over, and it is the thing I am worst at, which is fighting while thinking about something else. Gareth said, "You have a habit, my lord. You go away. Something interesting happens in the middle of a bout, and you leave to go and look at it, and you come back a half-second later, and out here a half-second is the whole of the transaction." He is right, and it is the same fault that makes me useful. I have watched myself do it. A man's guard drops in a particular way, and some part of me wants to work out why rather than hit him. Afterwards, by the fire, with the men out of earshot, he asked me the question he had been circling for 11 days. He asked what I intended to do with it. I said I did not know, which was true. Gareth said, "Then decide before somebody decides for you. Because at Ember you had a thing you could hide. A man sees a silver glow at night, and by morning he has told himself it was a torch. That is gone. What you did to my bench does not look like a torch. It looks like exactly what it is, and the first time anybody sees it, that is the end of the part of your life where people wonder about you." I asked him what he would do. Gareth was quiet for a bit, and then he said something that I do not think he meant to be as bleak as it was. "I would never draw it, my lord. Not once. I would carry it to my grave unused and let the frontier keep on the way it is going. And I know exactly what that would cost and who it would cost it to, and I am telling you honestly that I would still do it, and that is why I am a knight and not a lord." The third day I started using the other thing. I had not tested it outside the locked room. There had been no reason to, and a good reason not to. I did not know what it would look like from outside, and I was not going to find that out in front of 200 people in my own square. But we were riding through open country with wet lines in every fold of it, and I had 11 weeks of bench work, and no idea whether any of it was worth anything past the end of my own arm. So on the third morning I got off my horse at a ford, told Gareth I wanted to look at the crossing, went down on one knee at the edge of the water and put my hand in it. It came in 2 heartbeats. Low, quiet, no light at all worth the name. At that level it is less than a candle, and it is under the water and my hand is over it. From the bank I was a man testing a ford for depth, which is a thing lords do. The water was clean. I did 9 more that day. A spring head, 2 seeps in a hollow, a stock pond, 4 field drains, and a wet seam in a hillside that had no business being wet in that soil. 8 clean. The seam was not. It was on the northern Kelmere in a rough pasture with sheep on it, on ground that was green and growing and perfectly ordinary, and there was no gray within 4 miles of it that anybody could see. The nearest crust was over the ridge in 2 hours' ride west, and there was gray in the water under that field. I stood up and looked at a green hillside with sheep on it, and understood that I was looking at ground that had perhaps a year. Nobody who lived there would know until it came up. There is no instrument in this world that can tell a man the gray is in his water before his field dies. There has never been one. That is why the whole frontier has spent 5 years being surprised. I did not say anything to Kessa, and I have thought about that since, because Kessa spent 5 weeks walking 90 miles of front to give me a number, and I stood on that hill and got a better one in 4 seconds and told her nothing. I wrote it in the book instead. 3rd day, North Kelmere, wet seam above the sheepfold, gray in the water, no crust for 4 miles. I did not yet know what to do with it. But I knew, standing there, that I had stopped being a man who studies the gray after it arrives. On the 3rd evening somebody tried to kill me on the Kelmere road, and it was the best thing that happened on the whole journey. Kessa found it first, and what she found was a bird. There is a stretch about 9 miles short of Aymer's boundary where the road goes down into a wooded cut, steep banks both sides, a ford at the bottom, one way in and one way out. It is the only piece of ground in 40 miles where 30 men on horses cannot simply turn round. She came back up the road at a walk, not a canter, which is her way of telling me something without telling 30 men, and she said there was a jay going up and down the left bank and refusing to settle, and that it had been doing it for the quarter hour she had been watching, and that there was fresh horse dung in the trees 100 yards off the road where there was no reason for a horse to have been. Then she said the thing that decided it. Kessa said, "Somebody has cut the brush back on the top of the right bank, my lord. Not this year. About 2 weeks ago. You do not clear a firing lane and then wait 2 weeks unless you have been told when. 2 weeks. We had left Duncairn 6 days earlier, which meant they had known I was coming before I had decided to come, and there is only one way that happens, and I have written about the man in my town who talks to Corbel, and about a channel I have been feeding on purpose since the summer. I had fed that channel a picture of a failing Duncairn. What I had not considered, and this is my error and I have written it in the book, is that a lord who believes my water has failed is a lord who believes I am weak, and men do not ambush the strong. So I had built the trap that put 50 men on that bank. Fine. Then I would use it. Here is what we did, and it took about 20 minutes to arrange, and I enjoyed every second of it. We did not avoid the cut. Avoiding it tells them you know, and then they simply do it again somewhere I have not got a J. We went in, but we went in as 11 men and a baggage string, at dusk, tired, strung out, and careless, which is what they had been told to expect. Gareth took the other 19 off the road a mile back with Kessa guiding, up and around behind the right-hand bank, on foot, in the last of the light. They were in position behind the ambush before the ambush knew there was a behind. I rode into that cut at the front of 11 men, and I have rarely felt more comfortable in my life. They came out of the right bank at the ford, about 50 of them in a line, shouting, which tells you what they were, because soldiers do not shout at the start, they shout at the end. Bandits. Hired, mixed, no colors, 3 of them in good boots and the rest in whatever they had. And Gareth came down that bank into the back of them 19 strong, in order at a run, and the whole thing came apart in under a minute. It was not a battle. It was an arrest with casualties. They were caught between 11 mounted men in a ford and 19 coming downhill behind, in a cut they had chosen precisely because nobody could get out of it, and the ground they had picked to kill me on worked exactly as well in the other direction. 14 of them went down. The rest of them stopped, which is the sensible thing, and I have never once held it against a man, except the captain. He was one of the 3 in good boots, and he understood inside about 4 seconds that he was going to hang for this, and a man who has worked that out has nothing whatever to lose. He came out of the press at me on foot with a boar spear, and he came fast, and he came properly, low and committed, and I want to be clear that he was good, and that at might 14 and 4 years of Gareth's yard, I do not fancy myself against a committed man with a spear. So I lit it. I want to set down that there was no decision in it. 11 weeks ago there would have been a scramble and Gareth throwing himself across me, and afterwards a long conversation about how close that had been. That is not what I am anymore. It came in 2 heartbeats the way it comes now, and I put it all the way up. The whole cut went white. That is what I remember, not the spear, the light. Flame does not stand off the blade the way ember did. It goes into the steel, and the steel stops being a thing you can look at. And in a wooded ravine at dusk, it lit the banks on both sides and the water at the ford in 60-odd faces all at once, white and hard-shadowed like struck coins. He was committed. He could not have stopped. One cut. I did not brace, and I did not set my feet. 4 years of Gareth telling me to set my feet, and I brought it through on the walk, the way you would swing through long grass. It went through the spear shaft, and it did not slow down for the iron ferrule, and it did not slow down for anything after. Then there was a silence in that ravine that I have never experienced before, and do not particularly want again. 35 men still standing, and every one of them dropped what he was holding. Not surrendered, dropped. I heard about 20 blades hit stone in the space of a second and a half. One of them was on his knees in the ford with his hands on his head, shouting something I could not make out, and it took me a moment to understand that he was not surrendering either. He was praying. Nobody in that cut had ever seen aura above ember in their lives. Most men on this frontier never see it at all. A flame is a household knight of a great house, a man with a name, and there has not been one west of Aymer in living memory. What they had just watched was a lord walk through a line without hurrying and put a light through a man that came out of the world entirely. Gareth got my own men in hand the way he does, by finding something ordinary for everybody to be doing. Then he came and stood beside me at the ford. They will not fight you again, my lord. Not those, not anybody they ever talk to. And then, after a while, quieter, and Sir Gareth does not say things like this, so I have written it down exactly. I have spent 4 years teaching you to hold a sword. I am not certain there is anything left that I know how to teach you. That is not a complaint. I have waited my whole life to stand next to that. We lost nobody. 2 men took cuts worth stitching and 1 horse had to be put down, and that is the whole of the butcher's bill for 50 men who had spent 2 weeks clearing a firing lane for me. And then the useful part, which took until midnight. They were hired. All of them individually, in a yard behind an inn in the northern Kelmere, 11 days earlier, for 4 marks each and 8 more after, which is a great deal of money for men like that, and not very much at all for the man paying it. They had never seen who paid. They had seen the man who handed it over, and 3 of them independently described a gray, spare, shut-door sort of man of about 50 with ink on his fingers. I have met that man. He sat at a feast 18 months ago at Thornhold and glanced at a locked box on a sideboard while I took his master apart in front of 40 people. Corbel, Perrin Rennick's steward, the same man on the other end of the channel I have been feeding all summer, which tells me 2 things, and I sat with both of them for most of that night. The first is that Perrin Rennick almost certainly does not know. This is not how Perrin does things. Perrin is vain and loud, and he wants you to know it was him. 50 deniable men in a wood is a steward's idea. And the second is worse and better, depending on which day you ask me. Corbel did not do this because he hates me. He did it because a picture reached him of a barony whose water had failed and whose lord was riding north weak and unescorted. I built that picture. I sent it down that channel myself in the summer, and I was extremely pleased with it at the time. I have written in the book, a lie you plant is a lie somebody acts on, and you do not get to choose which part of it they act on. But I rode out of that ford with 50 men's testimony, a name, and 30 of my own who had watched me end the best of them in a single cut, and Gaunt Aymer's hedges were 9 miles up the road. I have never in either of my lives ridden anywhere in a better mood. And here is the part I did not see until we were riding again the next morning. I had just beaten the grey with a survey, not with a sword, not with the fire in my chest which I never touched all night, with 4 hours of reading water and a memory of where the dry ground was, and a thing that 30 trained men with steel cannot kill was turned around by a gravel ridge 200 yards away. I have been carrying Kessa's 90 miles of chain survey in my saddlebag for 3 weeks and thinking of it as an intelligence document, a thing that tells me where the enemy is. It is not that at all. It is a map of every place the enemy cannot go, and I have the only copy, and I am the only man alive who can add to it in an afternoon by kneeling at a stream and putting his hand in it. I have never in either of my lives ridden anywhere in a better mood than I rode out of that camp. We crossed onto Aymer's land on the 4th afternoon, and I knew before anybody said it because the hedges had been laid. All of them. Laid and pleached, the brash cleared and stacked, 4 miles of boundary folded down at an angle and woven into a wall you could not push a dog through, and then gone over again the following year for the new growth. Gareth rode up level with me and said nothing for a while, and then said the thing that was already sitting in my own chest. That is a hedge laid for a man's grandson, my lord. Harrogate village sits in a shallow bowl with a stream through it and the hall up on the rise at the north end, and we came down into it in the last hour of light. I had been building a picture for a month. I want to set down what I expected, because being wrong in that particular way is the whole of this business. I expected a closed place. Quiet in the wrong way, the quiet of a village that has heard horses and gone indoors. I expected thin people and the Lord's men on the road, and that specific silence you get where everybody has agreed in advance on what they are not saying. What we rode into was the finest village on this frontier, and it was not close. There were 40-odd people out in the last of the light doing ordinary evening things. 2 men were arguing over a hurdle. A woman was carrying a child on her hip and shouting at a second child about a gate. The mill was turning. There was a smell of baking, which is a thing you notice out here, because bread in a village oven at dusk means grain that nobody is frightened about. And the children came out to look at us. That is the detail that took the ground out from under me. In 5 years of riding onto other men's land, I have never once had children come out to look. Children on this frontier get called inside. They get called inside fast, by a mother who does not take her eyes off you while she does it, and it is the most reliable instrument I own. Harrowgate's children came out into the road and stared at Gareth's helmet, and one of them, a boy of about 7, asked Kessa what her chain was for. And Kessa, who has a face like a hatchet and no patience whatsoever, got down off her horse and crouched in the road and showed him. Tam brought his horse up level with mine and spoke quietly, and he was not looking at the people at all. He was looking at the roofs. Every roof in this village is sound, my lord. Every single one. There is not a house here with a shut door and gray thatch on it. I sat in that road with the smell of bread and a boy asking about a surveyor's chain, and I understood that I had made a mistake somewhere, and that the mistake was not in the arithmetic. The arithmetic was right. 940 people had not lost a soul to the world in 6 years, and the gray stopped dead at the ditch, and both of those things were true. I had simply assumed that a place with a horror in it would look like a place with a horror in it. Aymer came out to meet us himself at the door without ceremony, and that was wrong too. A warden makes you wait. It is not rudeness. It is the entire grammar of the thing. You send a man, the man takes you to a room. The room has a fire in it and no host, and the host arrives once he has finished demonstrating that his time is worth more than yours. Voss does it beautifully. Perrin Rennick does it badly. I do it myself, which I would rather not have to admit in the same breath. Gaunt Aymer walked out into his own yard while my men were still dismounting and took my horse's bridle in his own hand. I read him as he crossed the yard because I read everybody now and because I had ridden 4 days to find out what he was. Aura rank, spark. Bearing, no deception detected. Note, carrying something. Long carried, not hidden, set down in front of him. Spark. A hedge knight's rank on a man who has held a frontier grant for 20 years. He had never once climbed, and out here that means he had never once had to. And the rest of it I had never seen the Dominion say about anybody, and I did not know what to do with it, so I put it in the book. He is about 60, not a big man. He has the forearms of somebody who has done work, and gray hair cut short and badly as though he does it himself with a knife, and a farmer's face, weather in the creases, not wine. He looked more than anything tired. Not the tiredness of a bad night. The other kind. The kind that has been arriving for years and has stopped bothering to leave. Aymer said, Warden Vale, you dug 6 miles of tunnel to water a town that every man on this coast had written off. I said I had. Then you are the first man in 20 years to come onto my ground who might be worth talking to. Come in. Your men will eat with mine, and I will tell you now that the beds are poor, because nobody visits. He fed us properly and made no performance of it. Mutton, barley, cabbage, good bread, small beer. A farmer's table with a lord sitting at it. I have eaten at Thornhold with 11 wardens and cloth of silver heralds and cast pendant seals on woven silk, and I would have traded that entire evening for this one on the food alone. And he answered every question I asked him. That is the part I need to convey, because it is why I left his ground with nothing. I have spent a long apprenticeship out here learning the shapes of how men lie to me, the one who talks too much, the one with a single rehearsed sentence for a topic who cannot get off it, the one who answers a question you did not ask. Aymer did none of it. He simply gave me his ground. I asked how many people he had. He said 938 and told me the villages and the count in each, and Osric's copy of the last return said 941, which is the sort of error an honest book has. I asked about his revenue and he sent for the roll, put it in front of me and left the room while I read it, which is a thing only 2 kinds of men do. I asked about the gray, and he said the thing I had ridden 4 days to hear, in the flattest voice imaginable. Aymer said, it has not come onto Harrowgate ground in 6 years. I know it comes onto everyone else's. I have no more notion why than you have, and I stopped asking, because for a while I asked very hard indeed and it did nothing but wear me out. I asked whether I might walk his boundary. He said yes. I asked whether I might speak to his tenants alone, any of them I chose, no man of his scent with me. He said yes. I asked to see his parish register. There is a small thing that happened there, and I did not weigh it properly at the time, and I have thought about it a great deal since. He did not hesitate. He did not glance at anybody. He said yes in precisely the same voice, but he put his cup down first. He had been holding it all evening, turning it, the way a man does. And when I asked for the register, he set it on the board and then said yes. I wrote it in the book with a question mark and did not act on it for 6 days, because I then spent 4 days with the run of Harrogate and found nothing at all. And I found a great deal. That is the part I have not conveyed properly, because when a man comes back from 4 days empty-handed, he tends to describe the 4 days as empty, and they were not. They were full. Everything in them was simply the wrong shape. The tithe is the lowest on the frontier, not by a little. Aymer takes a smaller share than Rennick, than Auber, than Voss, than me. I checked mine on the ride home, and I take more, and I have a public board in a square explaining why. Nobody is in arrears. Not one household in 6 years, in a book that runs to 11 pages of them. I have arrears. Everybody has arrears. Arrears are what a real village looks like in a bad year, and there had been 2 bad years in that book. The common ground is intact. Every failing grant on this coast has quietly enclosed its commons over the last decade, because a lord short of money takes the one thing nobody owns, and it is always the poorest who lose by it. Harrogate's commons are exactly where they were on a survey 40 years old. The bridge is sound. I got underneath it. That is a habit now, after the Kelmere, and I would recommend it to anybody. You can tell more about a lordship from the underside of a bridge in 10 minutes than from a week of being entertained. The deck timbers had been replaced within the last 2 years, and the replacement was properly done. And there is a school. 2 hours, 3 mornings a week in the chapel, run by a chaplain of about 70 for whatever children can be spared. 11 of them the morning I looked in. That is 3 more than my own school had in its first year, and I had to pay a man from Highmore to come and do it. I went through all of that with a rising and entirely unwelcome feeling, and on the 3rd night I said the honest version of it out loud to Gareth in the yard, which is that if the returns had crossed my desk without the anomaly in them, I would have written this is the best-run grant on the frontier, and I should go and find out how he does it. Gareth said the thing he always says, which is annoying and correct. Then either your column is wrong, my lord, or a good man is doing a bad thing, and you have never once found the column to be wrong. I walked the southern boundary with Kessa and confirmed her work, which did not need confirming. There is a ditch and a laid hedge, and beyond the ditch the ground is dead, that flat gray felt that is not quite moss and not quite ash and takes the color out of everything near it, and on the near side there is winter barley coming up green. There is no wall, no work, nothing built, nothing burned, no line of salt or lime, no ditch deep enough to matter. I got down into that ditch with a trowel and took the soil out in layers on both sides like a man reading a wall, and it is the same ground. The same ground on both sides of a line the gray will not cross. Then I spoke to 19 tenants and got nothing, and on the 4th evening I worked out why, and it was humiliating. I was being decent to them. I had walked into 19 kitchens as the Lord who feeds his people. I had been warm. I had asked after their children by name because I am good at that. And I had let every one of them see that I wanted something. And 19 households looked at a strange lord being kind to them in their own house, and concluded, correctly, on the evidence of their entire lives, that a lord who is kind to you first is a lord who is about to ask for something you will not want to give. The miller at Wither had told me that 4 days earlier, standing in his doorway waiting for the price, and I had not been listening. Myra told me a year ago that I have a habit of treating my own goodwill as an argument. She was right then, and she was right in Harrogate. On the 5th morning, Aymer found me in his yard, and he was not unkind about it, which was worse. You have walked my hedge and read my roll and sat in 19 kitchens, and you have found a well-run grant with no gray on it. I could have told you that on the first night. I did tell you that on the first night." Then he said the sentence that finally made me stop looking at people. Aymer said, "You are hunting for a man who is doing something. Nobody here is doing anything, Warden. That is rather the point of it." Tam came to me on the fifth night gray in the face. He sat down without being asked, which he never does, and said the first useful thing anybody had said to me in 5 days. "They are not frightened of him, my lord. I have been in that kitchen 4 nights and they are not frightened of him at all. He comes in and they keep talking. A frightened house goes quiet when the Lord walks in, and this one does not." I said that was what I had found too, and that it was the problem. Tam said that was not what he had come to tell me. "They are frightened of each other." Then he explained, and I sat very still. In 4 nights in that kitchen he had not once heard a person finish a sentence about anything that mattered while a second person from a different village was in the room. Not silence. He kept coming back to that, and it is why it had taken him 4 nights. It was not silence. It was a swerve. A woman from the mill would begin to say something about her sister, and she would notice the carter from Elderhithe by the door, and she would land the sentence somewhere else, smoothly, the way you step round a puddle you saw coming. She would not stop. She would arrive somewhere harmless, and nobody in that room would remark on it. They all did it, and they all let each other do it. He gave me 3, and he had written them down, which I had not asked him to do, and which is why Tam Collar will have a department of his own inside 2 years. The first, a woman from the mill talking about her sister's new baby, perfectly ordinary, and she says she'll want her mother up for the birthing, and her mother won't come down from Elderhithe on account of. And there is a carter from Elderhithe by the door, and she finishes the sentence, on account of the roads being what they are this time of year. Tam's note underneath it in his own words: "The roads are fine, I walked them." The second, 2 men arguing about a plow team, which is the most harmless thing 2 men can argue about, and one of them says the team is short-handed since we lost, and stops, and the other man does not look up, and after about 2 seconds the first man says since we've been short a hand, and they go on arguing about the plow team. Neither of them acknowledged it. That is what Tam kept returning to. There was no glance, no pause anybody would notice from outside, no change in the volume of the room. A whole village has learned to hear a man nearly say something and then not have heard it. And the third, which is the one that made me put my cup down. An old woman by the fire talking to a girl of about 11 who was shelling something, and the girl asks her, idly, the way children ask things, how many grandchildren she has. And the old woman says 4. And Tam had been in that kitchen 3 nights by then, and had already heard, from 2 separate people in ordinary conversation, the names of 5. She did not hesitate, my lord. She said 4 the way you or I would say 4. She has been saying 4 for years. That is the one that told me what I was actually looking at, though it took me another day to say it out loud. It is not silence, and it is not fear of being overheard, and it is not a rule anybody enforces. They have edited the dead out of the way they speak. Not out of memory, the old woman knows exactly how many grandchildren she has, and there is a chapel wall now with all 25 names on it, and she will have gone and looked at it. Out of conversation. Because the alternative is that every ordinary exchange in that village, a plow team, a birthing, a child's question by a fire, becomes a door into the thing 4 times a year forever. You cannot live like that. So 900 people quietly agreed, without ever once agreeing, that certain sentences simply stop, and everybody else helps them stop, and nobody remarks on it. I have never seen anything like it, and I hope I do not again. Tam said, same village they talk, different village they swerve, and nobody ever says the name of another village's business. My lord, in a great house the servants know everything about everybody and they trade it like coin. That is the whole economy of a kitchen. This kitchen has no coin in it. I asked whether they were being watched. He said no, and that was the part that had put the gray in his face. Tam said there is nobody watching them. There is nobody to watch them. They are doing it to themselves. I want to lay out plainly what that told me, because it is the hinge of the whole business and I did not turn it fast enough. A tyranny needs watchers. That is not a moral observation, it is an engineering one. If you hold 900 people by fear, you require men, and men cost money, and they have to be somewhere. And I had walked that ground for 4 days and counted 11 armed men on the entire grant, 6 of them old. You cannot hold 900 people down with 11 men. It is not possible. I have costed garrisons since the first wall went up, and there is no arrangement of 11 men that keeps 900 people silent across 5 villages and 7 miles of ground. Unless you have built it so that the 900 hold each other down. Then you need no men at all. You need one rule, and the rule has to be shaped so that every person's safety depends on every other person's obedience. I did not know the rule yet. But I knew its shape, the way you know the shape of a load you cannot see from the way the timbers have bent. And I had been asking the wrong instrument for 5 days. I had been asking people, in a place engineered from the ground up so that people cannot answer. So I stopped asking people, and the next morning I went and asked the paper. Harrogatel's parish register lives in a chest in the chapel and goes back 140 years. I had asked for it on the first night and been given it on the first night, and then I had left it alone for 5 days while I was busy being clever at 19 kitchen tables. I want that on the record. Aymer handed me the answer on the evening I arrived, and I did not open it for 5 days. Here is what a parish register is. 3 columns kept by whoever in the village can write. Births, marriages, deaths. Every village on this frontier keeps one badly. They are the most boring documents in the world, and they are the only continuous account of ordinary people that has ever existed. I did not read it as a man reads a story. I read it the way I would read a beam. The way you check a structure is that you do not look for the break. You look at whether the loads balance. Everything coming in must go out somewhere, and if the sum does not close, then something is carrying a force you have not accounted for, and that is where the failure will be. Village is the same. People come in 3 ways: born, married in, moved in. People go out 3 ways: died, married away, moved away. If the sum does not close, then either somebody is lying or somebody is leaving in a way nobody has written down. 6 years, 5 villages, a day and a half, with a ruler and Osric's method of ticking each entry as it is carried across. The births are noisy, good, real. 22 one year, 31 the next, 16 in the year of the wet spring. The deaths are noisy. Also good. Fever through Elderhithe in the 3rd year takes 19. A hard winter takes 11 old people in a month. 2 men drown in the mill lead in 6 years, which is about right for a mill lead. The marriages are noisy, and every single one of them is in. Girls marry into Harrogate from Kelmere, from Blackmore, from the coast. 104 marriages in 6 years, and in every one of them the couple stays. Not one woman married out. Not one man went to his wife's village. In 6 years. And the moved-away column, which every register on this frontier has and which in Kelmere's book is the longest column on the page, is empty. Not absent, not unkept. It is ruled and headed and kept and empty. So I closed the sum. Births plus marriages in minus deaths across 6 years gives you a number. That number should equal the change in the population. Harrogate went from 946 to 938. It should have gone to 962. The book is short by 24 people, 24 over 6 years, for a year. I sat in that cold chapel and did the thing I always do, which is to assume that I am the one who has made the error. I did it again. I did it a 3rd time with the years in reverse order so that my hand could not repeat its own mistake. For a year, 6 years, 24. Then I went looking for the 24 because a name is not a number and every one of them had been written down on the day they were born. And that is where I found the actual thing, and it is very simple, and I have not stopped seeing it since. They are not crossed out. There is no death entry. There is no departure entry. They simply stop. Take 1. Aldric Vale, born in the 11th year, 3rd village, Mother Ann, Father Hal. He is in the book. He is confirmed at 12. He is in the tithe list at 14 as a half hand, and at 15 and 16 as a half hand and then a hand. And then there is no Aldric Vale. Not dead, not gone. There is a tithe list for the following year in the same hand on the same paper, and his name is not on it, and nothing in that chest ever mentions him again. His mother Anne is still there. She is in the register 4 years later standing godmother to somebody's child. I sat in that chapel with a candle, and I put all 24 of them back together, because you can. That is what those books are for, and nobody has ever used one for it. A parish register is not a list of names. It is 900 people's whole lives written down 4 words at a time by somebody who did not think he was doing anything. And if you are patient, you can walk a person from their baptism to the day the paper stops, and the shape of a life comes up off the page whether anybody meant it to or not. Maud Caro. Baptized in the 4th year. Married in the 14th, and I know it was a good match because the register names 4 witnesses and one of them is the miller, and a miller does not stand at a poor wedding. 2 children, one buried at 11 months, which is the ordinary grief of this world and is written in the same hand and the same ink as everything else. A 3rd child in the 19th year. She stops in the 11th month of the 20th year. Her husband appears once more, 4 years later, marrying again. Both children are confirmed after she stops. Somebody raised them. Osric Ward, no relation to my Osric, and I sat and looked at that name for a while longer than I should have. Baptized in the 2nd year. Never married. He is in the tithe lists for 19 consecutive years as a full hand, which means he worked and worked and worked and never had a bad year, because a bad year shows. A man drops to a half hand when he is ill and comes back the next year, and it is all in there. 19 years of a man being reliable, and then the paper stops. Tom Elder, who was 14. He is the youngest of the 24. He is baptized, he is confirmed, and he appears on exactly one tithe list as a half hand in the year he stopped. That is the entire written record of Tom Elder. He is in that chest 3 times, and one of them is his baptism, and one of them is the only work he ever did. I want to be plain about what I was doing because it was not sentiment. I was looking for the pattern, and you find a pattern by handling the individual cases until the shape falls out, and the shape fell out at about the 11th name, and I did not want it. They are not the poor. I checked, because I expected it. That is how this is usually done, everywhere, in every world I have lived in. It is not. Maud Caro's people are on the tithe lists at 4 hands. There are cotters in that book, and there are men with plow teams, and both are in the 24 in the proportion you would expect if you drew names out of a barrel. They are not the friendless. 19 of the 24 have living families still in the register afterwards. Mothers, husbands, brothers standing godfather to somebody's child 2 years later. They are not the sick. No pattern of half hands beforehand. Osric Ward worked 19 straight years at full, and no family gave 2. Not once in 6 years, across 5 villages and 24 names. That is the one that put my hands flat on the table. Because if you take 4 a year from 900 people at random over 6 years, the chance that no household is struck twice is not small. It is vanishingly small. I did that some 3 times on the back of the tithe list. 24 draws from about 240 households, and you would expect 2 or 3 doubles, and there are none. Nothing natural distributes itself that evenly. Evenness is not what chance looks like. Evenness is the fingerprint of a decision, and somebody had sat down with a list of 940 people and taken care to make it come out fair. Fair. That was the word that arrived in my head in that chapel. I found all 24. It took me until dark. And here is the pattern in them which I did not see until I laid them out by month. They all stop in the same month. Every one of the 24 goes out of the paper between the last week of the 11th month and the first week of the 12th, the dark of the year, and they are not the old. That is the thing I had half expected, and it would almost have been bearable, some ugly custom about the very old walking out into the cold, which this world has seen before and called by kind names. They are not old. The youngest was 14. The oldest was 51. The mean is 26. 11 women and 13 men from all 5 villages, and in 6 years no village gave more than 6, spread evenly, across villages, across years, across men and women, across families, and I checked every family and no family gave 2. That is not a plague, and it is not a custom, and it is not an accident. Nothing natural distributes itself that evenly. Evenness is the fingerprint of a decision. Somebody had sat down with a list of 940 people and taken care to make it come out fair. Fair. That was the word that arrived in my head in that chapel, and it is why I went out into the yard and was sick against the chapel wall, which I have not done since my first battle, because whoever was doing this had been scrupulous about it. I went up to the hall after breakfast with the register under my arm and the sheet of 24 names on top of it, and I did not bring Gareth, which Gareth has still not entirely forgiven. Aymer was in the small room at the end where he does his business, with the tithe rolls out. He looked up. He saw what was under my arm, and he set down his pen with the care of a man putting down something breakable. He did not ask what I wanted. He said one word. Sit. I put the sheet in front of him and read the names out, all 24. It took a while. I did it because I had decided on the way up the hill that if I was going to make a man say this out loud, I would not do it from behind a number. When I finished, Aymer did not deny anything. He did not go pale or angry or start explaining. He looked at the sheet for a long moment and told me I had missed one. 6th year. There were 5 that year, not 4. The extra was a man called Owen Farrow, and he is not on your list because he is not in the register at all. He came over from Kelmere in the spring and was never written in. I put him in because he was here. I have thought about that one more than the other 24 together. Then he told me the whole of it, from the beginning, in a flat voice, in about a quarter of an hour, and never once asked me to understand. 6 years ago the Grey came over his western hedge and took 1,100 acres in a season. He fought it the way we have all fought it, which is to say, he did a great deal at enormous cost and none of it worked. He dug. He burned. He moved 2 villages back and lost a third of his sown ground and watched 200 people leave in 18 months. He wrote to the crown 4 times and got 2 acknowledgments. And in the 11th month of that year, a man from the westernmost village went out into the Grey drunk and did not come back, and the Grey went back 100 yards from where he had gone in, and stayed back. Aymer said I did not believe it. I want you to know that I spent 4 months not believing it. I sent oxen. I staked 3 oxen out on that ground and it did nothing at all. It does not want meat, Warden. I have tested it more carefully than you would credit, and I am not going to describe all of the tests to you. He said that the first year he did it with a condemned man, and told himself that was different. The man's name was Rel, and he had beaten a carter to death outside the mill in front of 6 witnesses over the price of a load of stone, and he was going to hang in the 2nd week of the 12th month, and Aymer went down to the Undercroft and offered him a different ending. He took it. I want you to understand that he took it gladly and thanked me, and that I let myself keep that for about 4 years. He said the 2nd year there was nobody condemned. There had been no killing on Harrogate ground that year, which in an ordinary lordship is a thing to be pleased about. So he took a volunteer and paid the family. The man was called Hal Farrow. His wife had died in the spring, and he had 2 boys of 9 and 7, and a holding too small to feed them. And Aymer settled 40 acres and a plow team on those boys in perpetuity, in writing, witnessed, and it is in the rolls, and I have read it. A grant of land to 2 children with no explanation of what it was for. Those boys are grown men on my ground now. One of them has a wife. He does not know. His brother knows because somebody told him when he was 14 out of spite, and he has not spoken to me since he was 14, and he is entirely correct not to. And he said that in the 3rd year he had sat down in the room we were sitting in the 9th month, with no condemned man and no volunteer, and had begun going down the list of 940 souls looking for somebody. That was the moment. He was very clear about that. Not the 1st year and not the 2nd, the 3rd, with the roll in front of him and a candle, going down a list of his own people, and weighing which of them would be least missed. Aymer said, I got as far as a woman in the 4th village. A widow, no children living, and I had got as far as thinking the words she is very old anyway, and then I stopped, and I sat there, and I understood exactly what I was and precisely how it was going to go from there. Because I would have found her. And next year I would have found somebody a little less old, and the year after that a little less friendless, and every single time I would have been able to tell myself it was different. That is how it is done, Warden. Nobody decides to become that. You arrive at it one reasonable step at a time, and every step is defensible. So he stopped choosing and made the lot. It is, and I want to say this plainly because it is the most uncomfortable sentence in this account, the most morally serious thing anybody on this frontier has ever done. A lord looked at a thing he had the power to do quietly in the dark, to people nobody would ask about, and instead built a machine that would come for his own household with the same probability as anybody else's, and put it in the open, in front of everyone forever. He did not do it because he was good. He did it because he had seen what he would become otherwise and was more frightened of that than of the barrel. And he was right about the machine and wrong about the world. That is Gaunt, Aymer, and Tyre. He solved the wrong problem beautifully. Every soul on this grant between 14 and 60 goes in it. Mine goes in it. My son's went in it. My son came out of it in the 4th year, and I stood there while it was drawn, and I did not put my hand out to stop it, and he walked out at the dark with the other 3. That is the only reason any of them still tolerate me. I asked his son's name, because it seemed to me that if I was going to sit in that room I could at least do that much. He said it was Ned. He said it in the same flat voice he had used for the tally cutting and the barrel and the widow in the 4th village, and it did not waver, and I understood that the flatness was not coldness. It was load-bearing. It was the only thing holding the whole account up, and if he had let it go anywhere he would not have been able to finish, and he had clearly decided a long time ago that he was going to be able to finish. He said Ned was 26 and had been going to take the grant. Then he told me the part I had not asked for. Aymer said he came to me the night before, and I thought he had come to ask me to stop it, and I had my answer ready. I had had my answer ready for a fortnight, and he had not come for that at all. He had come to ask me who I meant to leave the grant to now, because there was nobody obvious, and he wanted to know it was settled before he went. He sat in that chair and made me write it down. There is a page in the back of Harrowgate's roll in Aymer's hand, dated in the 11th month of the 4th year, naming a successor. I have read it. It names nobody in his family because there is nobody. It names the grant itself, the villages jointly by name, with the tithe and the hall and the whole of it, to be held in common if the crown would permit it, and by whatever arrangement they could make if it would not. A dying man's son sat in a chair on the last night of his life, and made his father write down what should happen to 900 people afterwards, and neither of them appears to have considered for one moment that the answer might be nothing. I did not say anything for a while after that. There was nothing available to say, and I have thought since that this is the reason the whole thing held for 6 years. Not the lot, and not the fairness, and not the rule about the village fetching runaways back. They watched him put his own son in the field and do nothing. After that, there was no argument left that anybody could make. I asked him, and my voice was not steady, and I am not going to pretend otherwise, why nobody runs. He said that was the part I would not like. Aymer said because the lot is drawn from the living. If a man runs after the draw, the village must put in another name to make up the 4. So the village fetches him back. Not my men, theirs. Fathers have gone out after sons, Warden, and brought them home and stood in the field at the dark and watched. That is why nobody leaves Harrowgate. Not the year of their lot. Any year. Because a man who goes in the spring is a man whose name is not in the barrel in the winter, and the 4 still have to come from somewhere. There it was. That was the rule. That was the whole engine, and it needed no watchers and no jailers and no men-at-arms at all, because he had built it so that every person's survival depended on every other person staying exactly where they were. He had not built a tyranny. He had built an arithmetic and handed the knife to the people it was pointed at. And then he made his case, and I have to set it down honestly because it was a good one. Aymer said Kelmere has lost 206 people in 6 years. Blackmore is worse. I have lost 25. I know exactly what I am, and I have known for 6 years, and I will tell you the one thing I have never said aloud to another living man. I would do it again this winter. I will, because the sum has never once come out the other way. I asked whether he had ever tried to find out why it works, what the gray is, what it takes, whether there might be any other thing in the world it would accept. And Gaunt Aymer looked at me with those tired eyes and gave me the answer that decided everything that followed. No, because if I had ever found something else, then everything before it was murder. And I have 900 people, and I cannot afford to be a murderer, Warden. I can only afford to be a man doing his arithmetic. The dark of the year was 19 days off, and I asked to see the list, and he gave me that too. I have stopped remarking on how freely Gaunt Aymer handed me every single thing I asked for, because by then I understood what it was. It was not confidence, and it was not arrogance. He had been carrying this alone for 6 years, and some part of him had been waiting a very long time for somebody to come and take it off him, and the rest of him had concluded that man did not exist. The draw happens in the 9th month, not at the dark, 2 months before. I asked him why, because my first thought, my genuine first thought, and I am not proud of it, was that it was cruel. 2 months of a person knowing. He said it was so they could put their affairs in order. Then he said the rest of it, which had not occurred to me at all. Aymer said, and so that everyone else has to look at them for 2 months. Warden. If it were drawn on the day, this place would be a village that loses 4 people every winter and does not think about it in between. 2 months means every soul on this grant sits in the same church as those 4, all autumn, and knows exactly what they are looking at. I did that deliberately. It is the only honest thing in the whole arrangement. I have thought about that more than almost anything else he said to me. The mechanics are very simple and take about a quarter of an hour, and he described them to me in the flat voice of a man reading out a procedure, which is what it had become. Every soul on the grant between 14 and 60. Names on identical wooden tallies, cut the same length, by 2 men from different villages who check each other's count. Into a barrel. The barrel is turned in the open in front of everyone by a child chosen at random on the day, and Aymer stopped there and told me the reason for that too, unprompted, and I wish he had not. A child cannot be bribed, and everyone knows it. That was not my idea. That was a woman in Elderhithe in the 2nd year who did not trust me, and she was right not to, and I put it in. 4 tallies drawn. Read aloud twice. Written into a half-sheet in his own hand. He gave me the half-sheet. Corin Farrow, 31, Elderhithe. Merk Sudden, 44, The Mill. Elin Rowe, 19, Harrogate. Bet Pell, 27, Elderhithe. I read that 4th name 3 times, and then I went out of the hall and stood in the yard in the cold for a while. I want to be careful here, because I have watched men perform grief for strangers, and it has always made me trust them less afterwards. I did not know Bet Pell. I had never met her. She had married into Elderhithe 2 years ago, and I could not have picked her out of a group of 4 women. I know her sister. Nesta Pell has worked in my town for a year and a half. She came in with the 2nd wave off the Kelmere, and she is a wheelwright's daughter with a wheelwright's forearms, and she runs the timber yard at the 3rd Shafthead now because Ren Alder came and told me she was better at it than the man I had put there. She has stood in my workroom and argued with me about the seasoning of oak for the best part of an hour. She calls me my lord in a tone that makes it perfectly clear she is doing it as a courtesy to the office and not to me. And once, in the middle of that argument about cart axles, she mentioned that she had a sister up north who had married a man in Elderhithe, and that she had not seen her in 2 years because the road was bad. I said something about the road. I do not remember what I said about the road. That is the whole of my connection to Bet Pell. Her sister argues with me about timber, and it was enough, and I am not proud of that either, and I have thought about it all winter since, because I had already made my decision. I had made it in that cold chapel with 24 names in front of me and a candle burning down. I had done the sum and looked at 900 against 4, and understood exactly what Aymer was, and known that I was going to end it. And it was all still policy until I read a name I could put a face beside, and the face was not even hers. I do not think that is a flaw in me particularly. I think it is a flaw in people, and that anybody who tells you otherwise has not tested it. But a man who runs a barony ought to know which of his decisions are arithmetic, and which are because somebody's sister argued with him about oak, and I did not know, and that frightened me more than the walk to the hall had. I went back inside and asked Aymer one question. I asked what would happen if I simply took the four away, put them on horses, rode them south, gave them land at a shaft head, and never brought them back. He answered immediately, because of course he had thought about it. Then in 19 days the gray comes to a field with nobody in it, and in the spring it takes Elderhive, and my people will know precisely whose doing that was. And next winter they will draw for themselves, without me, and they will not be careful about it, because the man who made it fair will be dead in a ditch by then. He was right. That is the thing about him I have never been able to put down. He was almost always right about the mechanism, which meant that taking the four was not a rescue. It was a delay that would cost Elderhive and then cost 4 more people, chosen worse. To actually end it I had to break the thing that made the arrangement necessary, and I had to do it in 19 days, in front of 900 people who had believed in it for 6 years, with a sheet of paper. I went out and walked his boundary again, and I want to be honest about why. It was not method. I was angry, and I have learned that when I am angry the only safe thing to do with myself is to go and measure something. So I took Kessa and the level and I went, and measured the one thing on that grant I had already looked at twice and not seen at all. Here is what I had been doing wrong for 6 days, and it is the same mistake Aymer had been making for 6 years, and it is the oldest mistake there is. I had been looking at the line where the gray stops. Of course I had. That is where the interesting thing happens. That is where you stand with one boot in dead ground and one in barley and feel the hair go up on your arms. Every man who has ever come to look at Harrogate has stood on that line, and I had got down in the ditch with a trowel like a fool and read the soil on both sides of it, and the soil is the same, because the soil was never the point. You do not find out why a building is standing by staring at the wall that has not fallen down. You find out by asking where the load is going. So on the 6th morning I stopped looking at the edge and started walking the water. And about 2 miles along the southern hedge, in a piece of rough ground that no one had any reason to visit, I found a ditch that had nothing to do with the boundary. It was 6 years old and half silted and grown over with willowherb, and it was perfectly obvious once you were standing in it. And it was on the wrong line. A boundary ditch follows the boundary. That is what makes it a boundary ditch. This one left the hedge at an angle and ran away southwest across open pasture for 1.25 miles, and then turned and then ran again. It was following the contour. I put the level on it. Kessa held the staff. It took us the rest of that day and all of the next, and by the second evening we had 11 miles of it, and I sat down on a bank with the sheet on my knees and I understood what I was looking at. And it is the single most important thing I have learned since I came to this world. It is a drainage system, not a ditch. A system 11 miles of intercepting cut, laid along the contour, catching every wet line coming down off the western ground before it can get into the bowl that Harrogate sits in, and carrying it away south to the Elder Brook. It is competent work. It is not clever work. There is nothing in it I would not expect of any careful man with a spade and 400 people, and no idea what he was doing, but the line of it is right, because the line was chosen by the water and not by him. Aymer dug it in his first year. It is the he dug in his own account, the thing he mentioned in a list of failures between burning and moving the villages. He put 400 people on it for a winter, and it did not stop the gray. And in the 11th month a drunk man walked into the waste, and Gaunt Aymer stopped digging and never went back to it, and let willowherb grow over 11 miles of the only thing on this frontier that has ever worked, because it did not stop the gray that year. Of course it did not, and this is the part I want to set down carefully because it is the whole of it. The gray was already inside the bowl. If the thing travels in water and Kessa has 90 miles of survey saying it does, then it is not a crust creeping over the top of the ground. The crust is what you can see. The crust is the symptom. The thing itself is in the water table, in the wet seams under the soil, and it goes where the water goes, and it comes up where the water comes up. Which means the front is not a line at all. The front is a catchment, and a catchment has a divide, and everything inside the divide drains to the same place. And if you cut the incoming wet lines at the top, you do not stop what is already in the basin, you stop it being fed. And then the basin drains, and it drains at the speed water drains through clay and gravel, which is not a season. It is years. So the sum runs like this. Year 1, he digs and nothing happens, and he gives up in despair. Years 2 through 6, the basin he cut off is slowly emptying, and the gray retreats 1/3 of a mile a year. Out of ground it had already killed, backing west toward the water it can still get to. 1/3 of a mile a year is not a bargain being honored. That is a drainage curve. I have seen that shape on a sheet of paper 100 times in another life. It is the most ordinary line in civil engineering, and it was drawn on this frontier in blood by a man who thought he was buying it. The last section of that ditch was closed in the 11th month of the first year. The drunk man walked into the gray in the 11th month of the first year. 2 causes. 1 month. He picked the wrong one. And then I did the thing that only I can do, and I want to be plain that I could not have done it in the spring, because in the spring I could not light the fire in my chest without something trying to kill me first. And before I did anything else, I went and stood in the 2 places that would tell me whether I was inventing a pattern. That is a discipline I have had to teach myself, because I am very good at building an explanation and then finding evidence for it. And a man who does that will be right most of the time and catastrophically wrong once. So the rule I have is, before you believe your own idea, go and find the place where it must be wrong if it is wrong, and look there first. For a drainage story, there are 2 such places. The first is above the divide. If the ditch is what is protecting Harrogate, then ground outside the catchment, on the far side of the watershed, where the ditch does nothing at all, should be untouched by any of this, and the gray should sit there exactly as it sits everywhere else on this frontier. If it were something about Harrogate's ground or its people or a bargain, the boundary would follow the estate, not the water. I walked 4 miles of the northern divide. The gray does not care about Aymer's boundary anywhere along it. It comes right up over his hedge in 2 places where the hedge is on the wrong side of the watershed. Onto his legal ground, onto land he pays tithe for, land where his own tenants have died in the barrel, and it sits there, perfectly comfortable, in a place the ditch does not drain. Nobody had ever noticed that, because there is nothing there. 200 acres of rough grazing on the far side of a hill. Aymer had been telling himself for 6 years that the gray did not come onto Harrogate ground, and it had been standing on Harrogate ground the entire time. In the one corner the water did not reach. The second place is the low corner. If it drains, the last of it to go should be the wettest, lowest ground inside the basin, the place the water sits longest. And that is exactly where the deepest surviving crust is, a boggy 1/4 mile in the south of the bowl that everyone assumed was just bad ground. Both tests came out the way the drainage story says and the way the bargain story does not. Then I got down on the bank of that ditch and put my hand in the water and kindled. It came in 2 heartbeats, the way it does now, quiet and low and cheap, no more effort than lifting a cup. And I read what was in the water the way I have read 406 jars on a bench in a locked room. Ditch water this side, clean. Then a 1/2 mile west over the divide in a wet seam in the rough gray. Not the crust. There was no crust there. Green grass, growing ground, ordinary pasture that no man on this frontier would have looked at twice. And the gray was in the water under it. That ground had 6 months, perhaps a year, before it went. Nobody would have known until it did. There is no instrument in this world that can tell you the gray is in your water before it comes up and kills your field. There is now, and it is me, and it costs me nothing, and I can do it 40 times in a day. I sat there in the wet with my hand in a ditch and I laughed, and Kessa asked me what was funny and I could not tell her. Because the thing I had spent a year believing was a very expensive parlor trick, 4 gallons, 2 days on my back, useless at any scale that matters, was never a way to clean the water. It is a way to find it. I do not need to cleanse a river. I need to know which stream to cut, and where, and that is a survey problem, and I have spent every season since I got here becoming the only man on this coast who can answer a survey problem. I did not go to Aymer with an argument. There is no arguing a man out of a thing he has paid 25 lives for. He would have had to be 25 times as wrong as I was persuasive, and nobody is. So I did not argue. I predicted. 2 days of work with Kessa, on the floor of the chapel because it was the only room with a table big enough. Here is what goes into it, because the method is the whole of my case, and I would like it to be repeatable by anybody who reads this. 1. The catchment. 11 miles of leveling gives you the divide, the line over which water on one side goes into Harrowgate's bowl and water on the other does not. That is not opinion. That is a chain and a staff and arithmetic, and 2 people can do it in 2 days. 2. The volume held. The basin inside that divide is about 19 square miles of catchment above the ditch line, on clay over gravel, and Bram taught me 3 years ago how to read what a gravel bed holds and how fast it gives it up. A basin that size, cut off at the top, does not empty in a season. It empties over years, and it empties fastest at first and then slower, and if you plot that it is not a straight line, it is a curve that flattens. 3. The observed retreat. Kessa's 11 felled trees gave us dates. The ditch line 6 years ago, half a mile out 5, a mile out 3, 2 miles out last year. And when you put those 3 together, the third one is not new information. It is the same curve. The tree ring dates and the drainage arithmetic are 2 entirely separate measurements of the same thing, done by different means, and they agree, which is the only moment in this whole business where I stopped doubting myself. 4, and this is what made it a prediction instead of a story, the gaps. The old cut has silted out completely in 2 places, one at the crossing of a cart track where the ditch had been filled to make the road, one where a bank had slumped in about 4 years ago. Water is still getting into the bowl at both. So if the ditch is doing this, the gray must have retreated unevenly, and it must be further east, right now, in exactly 2 places and at no others. 2 fingers, one behind each gap, and I could tell you roughly how long each of them ought to be from how much water each gap was letting through. That is a falsifiable claim. That is a thing that is either standing in a field or it is not. We drove the northern stake at midday on the 2nd day, and Kessa drove the southern about an hour later, and neither of us said very much on the walk back. I did not sleep that night, and I want to be honest about why. It was not fear of being wrong in front of Aymer. I have been wrong in front of people before and survived it. It was that if I was right, then 25 people had died for a mistake, and I was about to be the man who proved it to the one who made it. I asked for 6 witnesses, which surprised him. I wanted his steward because his steward keeps the rolls. I wanted 4 of his own men, chosen by him and not by me, because in a month's time I did not want this to be a thing the Warden of Duncairn said had happened. I wanted Gareth because I wanted somebody of mine. We walked 2.5 miles across rough country in a thin, cold rain, and it took the best part of 2 hours, and almost nobody spoke. I will tell you what that walk was like. It was like the last 10 minutes before you open a valve on something you have spent a year building. You have done the arithmetic 4 times. You know the arithmetic is right. And there is a part of a man that simply does not believe a piece of paper can tell you what a hillside 2 miles away is doing, and that part gets louder the closer you get. We came up onto the shoulder of the rough ground, and the stake was there where we had left it, a peeled stick with a rag on it, in a wet field with sheep 200 yards off, and the gray started 40 yards past it, not near it, not roughly by it. There was green pasture and there was a stake, and 40 yards further on there was the edge, running away north and south as far as you could see in the rain, and it had been sitting there for a year while nobody looked at it. Kessa's southern stake, when we walked to it, was inside 20. Nobody said anything for a long time. One of Aymer's men, a man of about 30 who had not spoken once on the walk out, went and stood on the line with one boot on either side of it, and came back, and then went and did it again, and then stood looking at the stake with his hat in his hands like a man in a church. The steward asked me how we had done it, and I told him, and he asked me twice more in different words, and I understood on the third asking that he was not failing to follow me. He was asking me to say something more complicated than a chain, a staff, and arithmetic, because a staff and arithmetic was not a large enough answer for 25 people. It was, though. That is the whole horror of it. It was always exactly that big. If you have come this far, you are the reason this series keeps going. A like costs you nothing, and it is the whole of what these get paid. And then Aymer asked me the only question left, and he asked it quite calmly in the rain, in the voice of a man asking about a fence. "How long have you known?" I said 2 days. And how long would it have taken a man to know it, if he had thought to look? That was the question I did not want, because the honest answer is that it would have taken a chain, 3 weeks and one man who understood contour, and there is not one such man on any of the 7 grants, and there was not one at Harrogate, and there was not one at Kelmere while Kelmere lost 206 people. I told him the truth. I said that 6 years ago, in his first year, the thing that saved this grant was already in the ground, and that he had dug it himself, and that he had stopped believing in it 11 months too early, and that everything after that, the condemned man, the volunteer, the lot, the barrel, his own son's name in it, 25 people walking west at the dark of the year had bought him nothing at all. Not 1 yard. The line would be exactly where it is standing today if no one had ever gone out into that field. Gaunt Aymer stood in the rain and did not fall down or shout or weep. He is not that kind of man, and I do not think he had the equipment left. He asked me one more thing, and it was about the ditch, and it was practical, and that was somehow the worst part of the whole afternoon. The 2 gaps, where the water is still coming in, can they be closed? I said yes. I said 11 days and 400 people, and I would want every spade on the grant. He said the dark of the year was in 11 days. I said I knew. We closed the gaps in 9. I am going to give this its due, because it was the best-run piece of work I have ever had a hand in, and almost none of it was mine. The northern gap was 1,100 yards of silted cut through heavy clay and a spring line that had to be caught and turned. The southern was worse, 400 yards, but it had to cross an old causeway that somebody had built across the line of the ditch, and the causeway was the only cart road between 2 of the villages, and taking it out in November meant those 2 villages could not reach each other until the spring. I put it to them. I did not decide it. That is a thing I have learned late, and at cost. When the work is theirs and the loss is theirs, you put it to them, and you accept that it takes an evening. They took about 40 minutes, and then a woman from Elderhythe called Sarah Dean stood up at the back and said that her people would walk the long way round for a winter, and that she would like it minuted that they had offered and not been told, and 11 days later I understood why she had said that and made sure Osric wrote it down. 900 people worked that ditch. Not 400. Everyone. Aymer put out the word, and I expected the usual, the young men, the paid gangs, the people with nothing better. What came out was the whole grant. Old men with mattocks, children carrying spoil in baskets. The mill stopped for 4 days, and the miller came out with his sons, because they had worked out what it meant faster than I had said it. It meant that at the dark of the year in 11 days, if the ditch closed, nobody would have to walk west. I have started work with 400 people before, and I know what the first morning of a big cut looks like. It looks like standing about. There is always an hour of it, and you cannot skip the hour people arrive, and they do not know where to stand, and the man who is supposed to tell them has gone to find the man who has the string. There was no hour. They were on the line before it was properly light, and when Wren Alder started calling out the section numbers, there was already a queue for the pegs. The northern gap was the hard one, and it was hard in a way I actually enjoy. 1,100 yards of silted cut through heavy clay, which is only labor, but 200 yards along it there is a spring line, a seep coming out of the hillside above the cut, running about 11 gallons a minute all year, which is why that stretch had silted in the first place. Every yard we cleared would fill with its own mud by morning. You cannot ditch through a live spring. You have to take the spring somewhere else first. I gave that one to Bram's method, and Bram was 4 days away. So I gave it to Bram's method, as I have watched him do it 11 times. Catch it above the cut in a stone-filled trench. Run it across the fall in a blind drain packed with graded gravel, coarse at the bottom, fine at the top, the way you would build a filter, and put it back into the stream 140 yards downhill where it can do no harm. 2 days, 16 men, and the spring came out of the hill and went where it was told, and the cut stayed dry behind it. The Harrogate men who dug that had never seen a blind drain in their lives. One of them, a big, slow, careful man called asked me at the end of the second day why the gravel had to be sorted, and I told him about the way fines migrate and choke a drain, and he listened. And then he went and told the other 5, badly but correctly, and I stood and watched a man who had learned a thing 40 minutes earlier teaching it to his friends. That is the moment I would keep out of the whole 9 days if I could only keep one. The Southern Gap was the one with the argument in it, and I have already written what Sarah Dean said about being asked rather than told. What I have not written is what it cost her. Elderhithe lost its cart road for a winter. That is not an abstraction. It meant the mill was 2 hours away instead of 20 minutes in the dark half of the year for 900 people's grain. It meant a midwife going the long way round. She stood up in a full barn and offered it in about 40 seconds, and I have thought since that she had done the arithmetic before she came in, because nobody is that fast without having done the arithmetic before they came in. Gareth's 40 arrived on the 4th day, having done 4 days in 3, and they did not stand about looking martial. They dug. That was Gareth's doing, and I did not ask him for it. They will dig, my lord, and they will dig where the Harrogate men can see them digging. A soldier standing on a bank with a spear, while a farmer works, is a soldier that farmer remembers for 20 years. The 4 whose names had been drawn worked the whole 9 days. I did not ask them to, and I would not have. Corin Farrow was on the northern cut from the first morning. Merrick Sudden brought the mill's 2 draft horses and worked them himself. Elin Rowe carried a staff for Kessa, and by the 4th day was reading it. Bet Pell dug in the Southern Gap beside her husband, and neither of them said a word about any of it to anybody, as far as I ever heard. There is no version of that I can write that does not sound like I am arranging it for effect, so I will simply put it down. 4 people who had spent 2 months knowing the date they were going to die spent 9 days digging a hole, in the cold, on the chance that a stranger's sheet of paper was right. On the 6th night we caught the error. That is what the checks are for, and it is the only reason I sleep during a build. 200 numbered plumbob templates so that no man cutting that ditch ever had to understand a gradient, only match a string to a mark, and a lantern round at midnight taking random levels, plotted on a board in the chapel where anybody could walk in and look at it. Section 19, in the middle of the northern cut, was 4 inches out over 110 yards, in the wrong direction. Left alone, it would have made a flat, 110 yards of ditch that held water instead of moving it, in the exact place where the spring came back in. 11 errors in 9 days, and none of the other 10 mattered. That one would have cost us the northern gap. The section had it recut by noon. The man who set the string wrong was called Odo, and he was about 50, and he came and found me afterwards in a state I did not enjoy at all, because he thought there would be a punishment, because on this frontier there is always a punishment. I put his section on the board as the worked example for the last 3 days, with the numbers and without his name, which is what we do at Duncairn now, and I paid him for the corrected yards the same as everybody else. It is not mercy. I want to be honest about that. It is arithmetic. If finding your own error costs you your wages, then no man will ever find one again, and I will get my 4 inches anyway. I will just get it in the spring, in the dark, when the ditch does not work and nobody knows why. I did the survey and the setting out and nothing else. Templates for the fall, because I have learned that lesson permanently. 200 numbered plumbobs so that no man cutting that ditch ever had to understand a gradient, only match a string to a mark. Night checks with a lantern, plotted on a board in the chapel where anybody could see them. Payment by the corrected yard. 11 errors caught in 9 days. None dishonest, which I think says more about Harrogate than anything in the parish register. And every morning before it was light, I walked the wet lines with my hand in the water. That is the part I could not have done in any previous year of my life. 20, 30 readings a day, kindled and let go, kindled and let go, cheap as breathing every seep, every spring head, every wet seam in the rough. And I moved the line of the northern cut 90 yards west on the third day, because the water 2 fields up was carrying gray, and the old ditch would have caught it too late. Nobody knew what I was doing. A man crouching by a stream with his hand in it is a man checking his water. Kessa thought I was tasting for salt. I let her think it. 406 mornings in a locked shed with a jar, and this is what they bought, not a brighter sword. The ability to walk a catchment and see the enemy underground, all day, every day, for nothing. On the 9th evening we turned the water in. I want to describe this properly, because it is the thing 900 people came out for, and it lasted about 90 seconds, and it does not look like anything. There is no ceremony to opening a ditch. What there is a plug, a wall of clay and stone left standing at the head of the cut all the way through the work, holding the stream back on its old line while you dig the new one dry behind it. And at the end somebody takes the plug out with a mattock, and it takes 4 men about a minute, and then the water decides whether you were right. That is the whole of it. 9 days, 900 people, and it comes down to whether a line you drew on a sheet of paper agrees with what water actually wants to do, and water is not interested in your reasoning. They came out for it in the last of the light. All of them from 5 villages, standing along a 1.5 miles of bank in the cold, which is not a thing anybody organized. Somebody said what hour it would be, and that was sufficient. I had Ren Alder take the plug out because he had run the line and it was his. The stream came round the corner of the old channel, found the cut and stopped, the way it always does. There is always a moment. It ponds up at the head and sits there and looks like a mistake, and if you have not done this before you think you have failed, and every man on that bank who had never built anything thought exactly that, and I heard it go along the line like a breath. Then it found the fall and went. It went down the northern cut past section 19, where we had taken the 4 inches out, and along the contour, and round the shoulder of the hill, and it kept going, and it was still going when it was too dark to see it, and men had to walk down the bank with lanterns to watch it arrive at places. It took the best part of an hour to reach the Elder Brook. People walked with it the whole way. I have built a well that saved 214 people, and I have built a tunnel 6 miles long, and I have never in my life had a moment like standing on that bank in the dark listening to 900 people follow water down a hill. Aymer stood about 40 yards from me and did not come any closer, and did not speak to anybody, and watched the whole of it. I have thought a great deal about what that hour was for him. Because everyone on that bank was watching a ditch fill up, and one man there was watching the last 6 years of his life turn out to have been unnecessary, in the dark, in the cold, surrounded by people cheering. And on the 10th night the gray came for the ditch. It came up the one wet line we had not yet closed, which was the tail of the southern cut, and it came at about the speed of a walking man, and it brought things with it. I have fought them twice before, and both times I was too busy to look properly. They are made of the ground. That is the only description I have that is true. Gray matter in the rough shape of a running dog, if a dog had too many joints, and they are not alive in any way I can defend, and they move like something remembering how to move. There is a sound around them, very quiet, and it is the worst thing about them. A great many small dry things breaking, a long way off. There were 5. There were also about 200 people on that bank with spades. And I knew it was coming 40 minutes before it arrived, which is the only reason this is a story about a fight and not a story about a massacre. I had been down at the tail of the southern cut at dusk doing what I did every evening, which was walking the wet lines with my hand in the water. The tail was the last 200 yards, unclosed, scheduled for the morning of the 11th day, and it was the one place on the whole grant where water still came into the bowl. At about 6 o'clock that water was carrying more gray than it had carried at noon. Not a little more. It had roughly doubled in 6 hours, and I had been reading that same seep twice a day for 9 days. So I had 9 days of numbers to compare it against, and I knew exactly what the ordinary variation looked like. This was not ordinary variation. I have no idea, even now, what that meant. Whether something was coming and pushing it ahead like a bow wave, or whether the rising gray was the thing arriving, and what came up out of the ground afterwards was only its hands. I have written both down, and I do not know. What I knew at 6 o'clock was that a number had doubled. So I got the working parties off the last 200 yards and up onto the high bank, and I sent for Gareth's 40, and I stood there for 40 minutes feeling like a man who has evacuated a building on the strength of a hunch, in front of 900 people, on the night before the dark of the year. Ren Alder asked me, carefully, because he is a careful man, how sure I was. I said I was not sure at all, and that I would rather be wrong in front of everybody than right too late, and that if nothing came he could tell the story about it all winter. Nothing came for 40 minutes. Then the frost at the far end of the cut stopped being frost. Because we had moved, there was nobody in the tail of that ditch. There should have been about 60 people down there in the dark, in a 4-foot cut with a spoil bank on both sides, which is to say in a trench with no way out that they would have had to climb. I have thought about that more than I have thought about the fighting. The fighting was 9 seconds. The 40 minutes was the whole thing, and all it was a man who had got into the habit of putting his hand in water twice a day and writing the answer down. I want to set down what those first 10 seconds were, because they are the reason for everything I did after. 200 people who have spent 6 years being told that the only answer to this is to send 4 of their own out into the dark, and here it was, coming up the ditch at them in the open, with their children carrying baskets 40 yards behind. Gareth got the line formed. He is worth what I pay him 9 days out of 10, and he was worth all of it that night. 40 men, 2 ranks across the cut, and the working parties going back behind them in reasonable order and not a rout, which is not luck, it is drill. And then I stepped through the line and told him to hold it there, and Gareth, who has spent 4 years telling me that a commander does not do this, looked at me for about a quarter of a second and then held the line where it was. I lit it. 4 months ago that would have taken a mortal threat and a great deal of luck, and it would have come as a flood I could not shape. It came now in 2 heartbeats, low and even and exactly as much as I wanted, the way it had come 400 times on a bench. And then I put it all the way up, which I had done exactly twice, and never outside a locked room. Ember was a corona, 3 feet of cold silver standing off the blade, unmaking what it touched. Everyone who has ever seen me use it saw that. Flame is not more of that. There is no corona. The light goes into the steel and stays there, and the blade stops looking like a thing and starts looking like an absence in the air, the shape of a sword, white-blue, hard to look at along the edge. The first one came in low along the ditch, and I did not cut it. I put the blade through the middle of it, and it came apart the way a wet ash heap comes apart, and what fell in the water was ordinary silt. The second and third came together, which is the only interesting thing they did all night, and I took them both on the backswing and the return, and I want to record that I did not feel either of them. Ember had weight, it dragged, it fought, unmaking a thing costs something at the moment of contact. Flame does not. It is like swinging through smoke that used to be a wall. The fourth one turned and went, and I let it. The fifth one stopped. It stood at about 11 yards in the dead grass at the ditch head, and it turned what it has instead of a head, and it held still, and it did not come on, and it did not run, and for 4 or 5 seconds, with 200 people behind me and the light off my own blade lying white across all of them, that thing looked at me. Then it went backwards into the dark, and the gray went with it, and it did not stop at the edge of the field. I stood there with my arm shaking and worked out 3 things in about the order they arrived. The first was that I was still standing. Ember cost me 2 days flat on my back for 4 gallons of water. Flame had just unmade 3 of those things in about 9 seconds, and I was tired the way a man is tired after a hard hour, and no worse. That is not a small change. That is the whole arithmetic of what I am, rewritten. The second was that 200 people had seen it, and that whatever I had been planning to do about that was now academic. And the third was that Gaunt Aymer had come through the line. He was 30 yards out, going west, walking at an ordinary pace in the direction the gray had gone. I shouted. It was all I had. I could not have run. He stopped and turned and said it back to me across the wet grass in that flat, tired farmer's voice, so that a good part of the front rank heard him. Aymer said it was the ditch. Then he said the rest, and it is the last thing he said to anybody. Aymer said 25, and it was the ditch, and I dug it. Somebody has to be the man who did that, Warden. It cannot be 900 people, and it cannot be you. Gareth went after him. Call went after him. They got perhaps 30 yards before the ground went bad under them, and Gareth had the sense to stop and haul Call back by the belt. I have thought a great deal about whether the gray took him or whether he simply walked until he stopped, and I have decided that I do not want the answer and would not print it if I had it. Nobody walked west. That is the sentence, and it took me a while to work out how to write it, because there is no event in it. Nothing happened. The dark of the year came 4 days later, and there was no procession to the lot field, and the 4 stones stood in an empty pasture with the gray a mile and a half further off than it had been in the autumn, and 900 people stayed indoors and ate their suppers. The telling of it was not much of an event either, and I was not the one who did it, and I am glad. Sarah Dean did it, on the morning after the ditch ran in the barn at Elderhithe, and she did it in about 11 words. She said the water was turned and the ditch was closed and nobody was going to the field this year, and then she sat down, because she is not a speech maker and had no intention of becoming one. Corin Farrow was standing at the back with his hat in his hands and did not move at all for a long moment and then went outside. Merk Sudden said, and 4 people have told me this and they all tell it the same way, well, I'd best get the mill going again then. And went and did that. Elin Rowe cried and then was furious with herself for crying in front of people, and Kessa took her outside and walked her round the barn twice, and I do not know what was said and have never asked. Bet Pell went home. I was not there. I was 2 miles away at the tail of the southern cut with Wren Alder finishing the last 100 yards, because there was still 100 yards of ditch that wanted closing, and it seemed to me that the people who had spent 2 months believing they were going to die in a field did not need a strange lord standing at the front of the room while they found out they were not. I have been told since that this was gracious. It was not particularly. I did not know what my face would do, and I did not want 900 people looking at it. I was gone 5 weeks, and I came back to a town that had not needed me for any of them, which is the second most satisfying sentence in this account. Here is the first. Earl Cadman Voss of Blackmore lost 1,100 marks that autumn buying grain he did not want, at a price nobody sane would pay from me. I need to go back to the summer for this. In the summer, the quiet office fed Corbel's Channel a picture of a failing Duncairn tunnel running at a third, 2 shaft heads gone brackish, intake quietly recapped. 19 days later it came back to us off the coast, which told us the route ran Duncairn to Corbel to Blackmore, and I wrote in the book that we now knew the road and left it there, because I was busy with a jar. Osric did not leave it there. Osric asked the question I had not asked, which is the difference between a man who collects intelligence and a man who uses it. He asked, what would a careful enemy do if he believed that? And then he and Kessa sat down and worked it out on paper like a problem in a book, which is exactly what it is. If Duncairn's water has failed, then Duncairn cannot feed 1,900 people through the spring. Duncairn will have to buy grain in quantity in a hurry on the coast in the worst possible season. A man who knew that 4 months before anybody else could go and buy up the coast's surplus quietly at a little over market, sit on it until Duncairn is desperate, and then name whatever price he likes to a lord with 1,900 hungry people and no choice. That is not a wild guess about Voss. That is precisely what he did to me 2 years ago with the carriage contracts, at a fifth over market lawfully, and it nearly finished me. It is his one move. He does not have another, and he has never needed one. Kessa said he will not be able to help himself. It is not greed, Aldric, it is that it worked. Men do the thing that worked and they do it harder, and they do not notice the ground has moved under it. So they let him. Kessa went to the coast in the 8th week and did nothing at all except be visible and worried. She let 3 separate factors see her inquiring about grain prices. She let one of them see her inquiring twice. She did not lie to anybody once, which she was rather insistent about afterwards, and which matters, because a lie in a contract is fraud and a worried face is not. Voss's factors began buying in the 9th week. They bought the coast's surplus forward at a 5th over market, exactly as before, and by the time I was standing in a ditch at Harrogate, they were holding somewhere near 4,000 bushels of barley at a price that only makes sense if there is a desperate buyer coming. And there was no desperate buyer coming. There was a 6-mile tunnel running at full flow, 304 clean shafts, and grain to the spring and past it. Then Kessa did the part I would not have thought of, and which I want on the record as hers. She did not simply let him sit on it. She sold him more. Duncairn had 1,100 bushels of its own surplus from the Shafthead plots, real grain, honestly ours, that we did not need. She let it be known on the coast, quietly, through the same 3 factors, that the Ashmarch was releasing a little stock because it needed coin. Which is a sentence that means Duncairn is so short of money it is selling food in autumn, and is also, word for word, entirely true. We were selling stock. We did want coin. Every single fact she put into that channel was correct. Voss bought all 1,100 bushels at a 5th over market, to keep them out of anyone else's hands, and to complete a corner he believed he was 2 months from closing. He paid me 1,100 marks over the market price for barley I had no use for, in order to starve a town that has more water than it can drink. Osric read me the ledger line for that when I got back and then had to stop and take his spectacles off, and I have known that man 3 years and 11 months, and I have seen him do that twice. 3 things about this, and then I will leave it alone. It is entirely lawful. Every statement we put into that channel is true. We sold grain we owned to a man who offered above market for it. There is no court in the empire that has anything to say to us. It cost us nothing. Not a man, not an hour of anybody's drill, not one thing that could have been spent on the ditch or the tunnel. It was done with 11 bushels of honesty and a woman standing on a key looking anxious. And it is the last time it will work. That is Hugh's note in the file, and he is right. A channel is a thing you spend, not a thing you own. Voss will work out inside a year that the picture he was buying was wrong, and when he does, everything that ever came down that road becomes suspect, including the true things, which is exactly why we have been so careful to put only true things into it. Hugh said he will not close it, my lord. That is the part nobody believes until they have been the one being run. He will keep it open and start feeding us things through it. And then we shall be the ones who have to decide what to believe, and it will be our turn to be wrong. The second thing waiting for me was Idris Hale's letter, and it was not the one I wanted. Idris Hale is 22. At Thornhold 2 years ago he was the one they laughed at, because he had let a tenant's tithe stand over in a wet year, and in that room that made him soft. I gave him the drainage answer for his east ground in the courtyard afterwards, free, with no condition attached, mostly because I was angry. He wrote to say that he had dug it. 3 winters of it, 400 acres, and his east ground came in this year at a yield. He had to write out twice, because he did not think I would believe the first number. Then he wrote the paragraph I have read 11 times. He said that he had heard from a carter that something had happened on the salt in the 9th month, and that 600 riders had gone away from a place they had come to burn, and that nobody had gone out to meet them. And he asked carefully, politely, in a letter he had clearly written more than once, whether I would tell him how. He is decent. He is the most decent man of that whole cohort, and he is the one I would pick if I had to pick. He is also 22, and he has a mother and a steward and a chaplain and a neighbor who is Fenwick Auber, and there is no version of telling Idris Hale that ends with only Idris Hale knowing. I have not answered it yet. It has been on my desk for 4 months. Every week I do not answer it, the answer gets worse. And the third thing was Bram, who does not write letters. He came and found me on the second evening in the workroom and stood in the doorway the way he does when he has decided something, and he did not sit down. He said he had been down the mother well at Cold Fell in the spring, before all this, because the collar wanted looking at, and that he had been down it again 3 weeks ago while I was away. He said the northwest face had 11 feet of dead rock in it in the spring. He remembered because he had scraped at it with a knife, and it had gone to powder, and he had not liked it and had meant to say something and had not. And he said that 3 weeks ago it was clean stone. Then old Bram, who has been at this 41 years, who was digging wells before I was born in either life, who is the only person in the Ashmarch that I would not be able to lie to and get away with it, looked at me for a while. I'm not asking, my lord. I want you to know I'm not asking. I'm telling you that I looked at it, and that I'm the only man on this frontier who'd have known what he was looking at, and that I've not said it to anybody and I won't. He went to the door and then he stopped and said the other thing, and it was gentler than I deserved. Bram said, "One of these days you're going to tell me where you actually come from. Not tonight, but one of these days because I'd like to have heard it before I'm done." I've never had a way to answer that and I still do not. Here is what was true when the ditch was finished. Harrogate has 937 people and no lord. The Grey has gone back 3.5 miles from the boundary and has not come back, and Kessa's stakes are still out there, and the line is where the drainage curve says it should be, which is the most satisfying sentence I have ever written. The method costs a level, a chain, one trained surveyor and a winter of digging. It requires no aura, no lord, no gift and no sacrifice. It will work for anybody. I want that on the record above everything else in this account, because it is the only thing I have ever built that does not need me. Bet Pell went home to Elderhithe. Her sister Nesta came up from Duncairn in the spring and they have both come south since, and Nesta has still not thanked me, which I understand better than she thinks. There is no way to thank a man for that which does not require you to say the other part out loud. Elin Rowe, who is 19, asked me on the third day whether the Warden of Duncairn took women into a survey party, and Kessa answered before I could, and Elin Rowe is out on the Western Front with a chain right now. I did not annex Harrogate. 900 people just let out of 6 years of drawing lots do not need a new lord riding in to explain their improved circumstances. I left Wren Alder there with 11 men and a brief 1-sentence long find out who they would follow, and in the spring they told us, and it is Sarah Dean. All 25 names are cut into the chapel wall at Elderhithe now, with the dates. That was Myra's doing and I would not have thought of it. And there are 2 things open, and I am putting them at the end so that I do not pretend this one finished tidily. The first is the ditch, and it is not the good news it sounds like. Water you divert has to go somewhere. I cut 11 miles of intercepting ditch across the top of Harrogate's basin and sent it south into the Elder Brook, and the Elder Brook goes down through the rough and out onto Kelmere's northern ground. I have moved the Grey. I have not destroyed 1 yard of it. I have taken it off 900 people and put it onto a watershed that drains toward a grant with 206 deaths already in its ledger, and I did that in 9 days with 400 people, and I did not think about it once until the water was running. Osric found it in a fortnight, because Osric finds everything. He put it on my desk without a word and went out. And the second is the one I cannot leave alone. There is a thing I have not put down anywhere in this account, and I am going to put it down here, at the end, where it belongs. On the last morning before we rode south, I went and stood in the lot field on my own. The 4 stones are not old. Aymer had them cut in the 2nd year, and I did not ask him why, and I think I know. Because a man walking out to die deserves to walk to somewhere, and a bare field is not somewhere. So he made it a place. That is the most Gaunt Aymer thing in the whole business. 6 years of a monstrous arrangement, run scrupulously with the stones cut properly. They are about waist high in a rough line, 60 yards out from the hedge, and there is nothing carved on them. I stood there for a while and did the only arithmetic left. 25 people, 6 years. A grant of 940 souls, which is 1 in every 235 per year. And on the other side of that sum, Kelmir has lost 206 people in the same 6 years, and Kelmir did nothing wrong. Kelmir had no barrel and no lot and no lord making a terrible decision in a candle-lit room in the 9th month. Kelmir simply had nobody who could read a contour, and the ordinary bad luck of the world, and it lost 8 times as many people as Harrogate did, and nobody has ever written any of their names on a wall. That is the thing I cannot get past, and it is not about Aymer at all. Nobody is going to build a chapel wall for Kelmir. There is no wall anywhere on this frontier for the people. The Grey takes the ordinary way by taking the water, and then the field, and then the reason to stay, and then the village, 4% a year quietly, with no one to blame and no decision made by anybody. Aymer killed 25 people, and I will carry that with me. He is also the only lord on this coast who ever counted. And I have spent 4 days riding home wondering what it says about me that the arrangement I found monstrous is the one that produced a list of names, and the arrangement I call ordinary misfortune has produced 206 people that nobody, anywhere, including me, has ever bothered to write down. I am going to write them down. That is the first order I gave when I got back, and Osric had it drafted in an afternoon. Every grant, every year, deaths and departures both, by name where a name can be found. It will not save one person. It is the least useful thing I did this autumn. I am doing it anyway, because Gaunt Aymer taught me one genuinely valuable thing before he walked west, and it was not about ditches. A thing nobody counts is a thing that can go on forever, and the last of it which I cannot leave alone. It stopped and it looked at me. I have spent 3 years telling anybody who would listen that the Grey is a condition, weather, a tide, a thing without intent, and that treating it as an enemy is a category error that will get us all killed. I have been right about that in every practical way that matters. Everything I have built against it has worked because I treated it as water and drainage and contour, and it is water and drainage and contour, and the ditch is holding. But water does not stand at 11 yards in the dark and hold still and consider a man. I have put it in the book with the others I cannot read yet, and underneath it I have written the only honest sentence I have about any of this. I have learned how it moves. I still do not know what it wants. Kessa came in 11 days later in the dark on a horse that had to be walked for an hour before it could be stabled, and she did not sit down and she did not take her coat off. She had been west. Not on the front through it. 60 miles past the line, out into country nobody from this frontier has looked at in a generation, because there has never been a reason and because the Grey is in the way. She put one thing on my table, a saddle girth. It was new. Good leather, properly stitched with a cast bronze buckle, and there is not a workshop on this coast that could turn out 400 of those, and not one in the deep frontier that could turn out 10. Kessa said, "They are not raiding, my lord. I have watched raiders my whole life. Raiders bring what they own. These are being equipped." Then she gave me the rest of it, and it took an hour, and Osric wrote it down as she talked because I told him to. 9 bands, moving east in the same season on the same lines. She had seen 4 of them herself and had the tracks of the others. Not the loose 50-mile drift of tribes following grass, a converging movement, all of it aimed at the same 3 passes, all of it arriving within about a month of each other. A standard. She had seen it twice at a distance. A bone standard with a red horsetail, carried at the head of a column, and not by a chief but by a boy, which is what you do with a thing that has become a symbol rather than a man's personal banner. And the reason which is the part that has kept me up since. She rode far enough west to see what they are leaving. It is all Grey. Not a front, not a finger, not 4 miles a year. 60 miles out there is no line at all anymore, because the line is behind them. The whole country from the far hills to the horizon is that flat-felted colorless nothing, and there are dead villages standing in it, whole and empty and perfect, with the thatch still on. The horse tribes are not coming east because they are cruel or because it is the season. They are coming east because their country is gone, and ours is the next one. And they have spent a generation being the most dangerous fighting men on this continent, and they have finally been given a reason to stop fighting each other. 600 came onto my salt in the 9th month, and I broke them with 4 guns and a boy reading a table, and I have been quietly pleased with myself about it for 2 months. 600 was one band. And it was the one that got there first because it was the smallest and the fastest, and it came in the 9th month because it was scouting, and it went home hungry with 410 people's worth of shaft-head villages sitting undefended 11 miles from my wall, and it will have told them exactly that. Kessa's count, which she gives with a range because she is a surveyor and not a poet, between 8 and 11,000 riders, arriving at the eastern passes when the grass comes. That is the spring. There are 240 men under arms in the Ashmarch. There is one wall, at Duncairn. There are 11 unwalled villages strung along 6 miles of tunnel line, a market that has to stay open, 4 grants to the south whose lords could not put 900 men in the field between them if the crown ordered it, and 1 crown chancery 6 weeks' ride away that has not renewed a frontier charter in 11 years. And there is one more thing, which I did not see until Osric said it out loud, and which changes the shape of everything. My lord, 11,000 men and their horses cannot cross 400 square miles of salt flat, not without water. There is exactly one place on this frontier with water enough for an army, and you built it. He is right, and it is the single most dangerous sentence anybody has said to me in 4 years. Every other lord out here is defended by being worthless. That has been the whole logic of the Ashmarch since the crown started using it as a dumping ground. Nobody invades a salt flat, because there is nothing on it and nothing to drink. I have spent 4 years and 14 months and 304 holes making that untrue. Duncairn is now the only thing on this coast worth taking, and the only thing that makes taking the rest of it possible. My tunnel is their supply line. My cisterns are their siege camp. The grain in my sheds is the difference between an army that arrives and an army that dies on the flats. They are not coming for the frontier. They are coming for my water, and they will have to come to me to get it, and they will be at the eastern passes when the grass comes. I sat with that for about a quarter of an hour, and then I found that I was not frightened, and it took me a while to work out why. It is because for 4 years I have been building for a fight I could not name, against a grey I cannot negotiate with on ground nobody wanted, and every single thing I have made has been a compromise with somebody else's timetable. This one has a date on it, 8 to 11,000 riders, 1 wall, 5 months. I know exactly how long 5 months is. I have dug 6 miles of tunnel in 14 and put 406 mornings into a locked room and taught a 19-year-old to break a host with a book of numbers. Get Gareth. Get Call. Open the shed. End of episode 6, The Frontier Crown.